Happy Tuesday. It's early February in 2019. This is the Dodger Game Channel broadcast of a Mormon Truth video. I'm going to be talking about serious problems in the LDS church, things that are killing young people, satanic ritual abuse, abuse by priesthood leaders, bishops, stake presidents, and others, young women's leaders, young men's leaders, and the institutional practice of covering up for pedophilia in the LDS church, as well as with the problem of one-on-one intimate and very invasive interviews by bishops and stake presidents of children, which is contributing to the massive amount of suicide in the LDS church among youth, making it actually the #1 cause of death in Utah for ages 10 through 17, as we'll take a look at over here. So I'm looking at some faces for change here. We've got Christy Johnson here, who has come out with a number of interviews and is gaining some foothold in Facebook, trying to help people to see the problem with institutionalized cover-up and policy issues that promote and make it a fertile growing ground for sexual abuse of children in the LDS church and community. So Christy came out discussing how her father had habitually abused her sexually, as well as her sisters, and which fact they, meaning she, her sisters, and her mother, had made known to LDS priesthood leaders such as bishops and stake presidents, and gotten absolutely no help. We're told to keep their mouths shut, that it was a private matter, and the servants of the Lord were dealing with it. Told not to go to the cops, that sort of a thing. And Christy basically helped us to see that we've got a pattern here. It's not just an isolated incident, as the church would have us believe. These are not isolated incidents, and actually it's my view that all of these individuals here speak generally in compartmentalized language concerning the problems, which I believe are interrelated with Satanism in the church, which Bishop Glenn Pace of the presiding bishopric brought to our attention, perhaps accidentally, in the memo that was leaked from him to the Strengthening the Members Committee, a committee in the church which is not known to most of the members because of its invasive NSA-style tactics. On the right, we've got former Bishop Sam Young, recently excommunicated because he has made quite a bit of noise regarding problems related to these one-on-one interviews and the resultant sexual molestation that occurs not just with the bishops, but many times in the grooming of these children, or the psychological damage that takes place leading to suicide or vulnerability to other sexual predators who may not be men with priesthood callings, such that they are the ones interviewing. However, just like the Boy Scouts of America, the LDS Church and the Catholic Church and the Jehovah's Witnesses, Watchtower and Bible Tract Society are just, they're like gardens for pedophilia. So I'm going to link some of these things together that have otherwise been kept into a discussion that has been so compartmentalized, as the church would like it to be, as to not reveal the overall nature and structure of the problem and the pedophile rings that exist in the church and are networked with other satanic groups. So let's cruise through here. Here's Bishop Glenn Pace, and we're going to read through his report on satanic ritual abuse after he interviewed 60 individuals He was only allowing himself to do one interview per week because he's more concerned with the financial affairs of the church as a member of the presiding bishopric than he is with these matters. And in 1 year, he interviewed 60 people. So maybe we're talking a year and a couple of weeks here, since he says he limited it to one per week. And 75% of these individuals were forced to participate in or witness human sacrifice, in addition to being sexually molested by LDS leaders. Yeah, we're going to read through Glenn's report. And as I said earlier, Utah has probably, I suppose they've got the highest suicide rate among teenagers. It is the #1 cause of death, and people are asking why. Well, a little investigation shows that the things I've just been discussing have led to these suicides in many cases. Noted Latter-day Saint filmmaker admits to molesting boy 1993 film. Victim wonders why church never offered him help. Well, that's the typical thing. It's just the way it's done in the church, same way it's done in the Catholic Church. It's a matter of cover-up, and that's business as usual. Yeah. Satanism is alive and well in the United States, and sexual predation and ritual abuse are part and parcel of that culture. And we're going to be investigating that in relation to mind control used in the church, a subject with which Jonathan Streeter has spent a lot of time in discussing. Here he is on the left. Let's put Jonathan in the Streeter. Jonathan in the middle of the street here. He's been probably one of the best people to articulate certain issues due to showing the techniques used in cult mind control in the LDS Church. And he's also done a nice video here articulating problems with these one-on-one interviews in the sexually damaging and psychologically damaging questions and experience had by these children that are contributing to the massive suicides. 60% higher than the rest of than the national average, according to one of those news articles I just took a look at. I've done a video showing statistics on Mormon divorce, use of antidepressants, and suicide rates, which are all alarming. And tends to be the case anywhere that you have a high percentage of Mormons in the population. Or in other words, the states with the highest Mormon population have the highest suicide and divorce rates typically, and bankruptcy and foreclosure and all that good kind of stuff. I did a video on that. Don't exactly know what the name of it was, but that's probably not that difficult to find. It wasn't more than probably 10 months ago. Okay, let's take a quick peek at Jonathan's, a portion of Jonathan's 7-minute video. We're only going to look at a few minutes of it. He does a great job really breaking things down. He's a very articulate individual.
This is Sam Young, a former Mormon bishop who's helping to change policy in the Mormon Church. In order to know why he's calling for a change, it's important to understand what's wrong with the current policy. In the current policy, local bishops take children behind closed doors and ask them invasive sexual questions under the heading of the law of chastity. Kids as young as 7 years old may be subject to questions about masturbation, pornography, or other sexual activities. Such interviews continue throughout the teen years, where questions become more invasive about sexual subjects under the heading of personal worthiness. To be clear, not everyone has the same experience. Some bishops choose never to pry into sexual matters. However, the open nature of the policy allows bishops to become very explicit in their questions if they choose to. These inappropriate interviews have led broadly to two types of abuse. The most familiar form is overt sexual abuse. These stories of rape and molestation began with church leaders using these private sexual interviews to groom children as victims. Still, other instances of overt abuse arise from the normalization of sexual conversation in private meetings with adults in the bishop's office, which grooms children who later encounter sexual predators without understanding the danger. The second form of abuse, covert sexual abuse, is harder to recognize, yet much more common. Covert sexual abuse happens when well-meaning but uninformed leaders use messages of shame, godly disfavor, or lost virtue or worth to demonize normal experiences of human sexual development. Like other types of psychological trauma and abuse, covert abuse affects how children value and accept themselves, and these feelings of worthlessness, self-loathing, and accompanying distortions of healthy sexual and psychological development carry over from childhood years into adulthood. The negative effects of covert abuse include depression, anxiety, self-loathing, suicide, and sexual dysfunction. These factors may impact every other aspect of the individual's life as they mature into adulthood. Readers can learn more about the scope and depth of both overt and covert abuse resulting from existing church policies by reading some of the over 600 personal stories submitted to Sam Young's website at protectldschildren.org. With a basic understanding of the nature of the problem, what sort of changes are being requested by Sam Young and others who support this movement?
One sentence, 10 words long. No one-on-one interviews. No sexually explicit questions ever.
Current policy is permissive in nature, informing bishops what they can do or should do. As judges in Israel, there is broad allowance for a bishop to ask any questions or hold any interview in any way that they want, so long as they claim they were inspired to do so.
These social justice warriors who are asking for change in the LDS Church as a solution to this problem are just not handling the entire problem. However, if they help get rid of this in the church, those people who are somehow trapped in the church by social and economic issues, with their family, with their employment, or just so ignorant that they're unaware of the vast amount of evidence of the church's complete and total dishonesty and what a hoax it is, selling salvation for money in a belief system based in the occult and born in the occult of witches like Brigham Young and Joseph Smith and those who guide the church now, then there is not ever going to be a real answer if people stay in this church, because it just isn't what they're told that it is. You can't reform evil. It was based on evil. It was built by evil people whose desires were always selfish and deceitful. That's my premise, and why I'm not part of this change the church business. I'm advocating leaving the church rather than paying your tithing to an organization that helps destroy lives, helps destroy families, and contributes to the absolutely astronomical suicide rate, depression rate, divorce rate, wherever people are actually part of this deceptive and destructive cult. So I want to go to information here on the satanic ritual abuse. This is a gathering of Druid high priests, I think, right there. All right, let's go and see what he had to say about satanic ritual abuse in the LDS Church and the involvement of leaders in this. Remember that the Church tells us that by the gift of the Holy Ghost and the mantle of these high and holy callings that are held by individuals chosen by the Spirit of God with a discernment that is part of this mantle of authority claimed, somehow we have Satanism undetected. Or is it just known to the leaders because they actually are Satanists? Let's see what Bishop Pace had to say. It doesn't look like he is one of those people. He seems to be one of the innocent, and his career went sideways quickly in the church after he had this memo leaked. I'm going to read portions of it because it's very revealing. July 19, 1990, Strengthening Church Members Committee, Bishop Glenn L. Pace is issuing this memo. The subject is ritualistic child abuse, also known as satanic ritual abuse, SRA. Pursuant to the committee's request, I'm writing this memorandum to pass along what I have learned about ritualistic child abuse. Hopefully, it will be of some value to you as you continue to monitor the problem. You've already received the LDS Social Services Report on Satanism, dated May 24th, 1989, a report from Brent Ward, and a memorandum from myself dated October 20th, 1989, in response to Brother Ward's report. Therefore, I will limit this writing to information not contained in those papers. I've met with 60 victims. That number could be twice or 3 times as many if I did not discipline myself to only 1 meeting per week. I've not wanted my involvement with this issue to become a handicap in fulfilling my assigned responsibilities. On the other hand, I felt someone needed to pay the price to obtain an intellectual and spiritual conviction as to the seriousness of this problem within the church. Of the 60 victims with whom I met, 53 are female and 7 are male. 8 are children. The abuse occurred in the following places: Utah, 37 of the 60, Idaho, 3, California, 4, Mexico, 2, and then 14 other places. 53 of the victims are currently living in the state of Utah, thus facilitating the interviews. All 60 individuals are members of the church. 45 victims alleged witnessing and or participating in human sacrifice. The majority were abused by relatives, often their parents. All have developed psychological problems, and most have been diagnosed as having multiple personality disorder in some other form or some other form of dissociative disorder. I want to stop there just for a minute. When I was mentioning Christy Johnson, in her case, I didn't mention that part of the issue here was that her father was an employee of the church in the church educational system, which also facilitated his abuse of other individuals, while the LDS Church was aware that he was a pedophile. Just like we see in the Catholic diocese. I not long ago watched a documentary type film. It was a dramatization showing the documentation of investigating a diocese in Boston, where eventually it was found that although the Catholic Church had done so much and with great power in the judicial system through members and money and so forth, to cover up that 200 priests there were pedophiles and had molested countless numbers of children during that time. And the film also just showed hundreds of dioceses in which similar abuse is occurring and has been documented. So the Catholic Church has a policy of massive cover-up, totally deceitful, And what I'm wanting to show here is that that is not limited to Catholicism, because the satanic ritual abuse problem is, well, it's part and parcel of Satanism, and all of these religions are run by occultists, which I've documented in other presentations. Continuing, ritualistic child abuse is the most hideous of all child abuse, according to Bishop Pace. The basic objective is premeditated, to systematically and methodically torture and terrorize children until they are forced to dissociate. The torture is not a consequence of the loss of temper, but the execution of well-planned, well-thought-out rituals often performed by close relatives. We're talking about generational Satanism, which many people who watch too much Disney and other media are trained to believe is just make-believe. However, that's not the case, because mind control isn't just a private matter, it's done on a mass basis in the media. There are different forms. Some are more subtle than this trauma-based mind control that is exercised within the satanic bloodline families running these religions, and a lot of other things. The other escape, the only escape for the children, is to dissociate, meaning we're talking about developing, well, let's just read it. They will develop a new personality to enable them to endure various forms of abuse. When the episode is over, the core personality is again in control of the individual and is not conscious of what happened. So we're talking about creating a multiple personality disorder, to put it in psychological terms. Children have no day-to-day memory of the atrocities they go through. Adolescence and early childhood with no active memory of what is actually taking place. Oftentimes they continue in rituals through their teens and early 20s, unaware of their involvement. Many individuals with whom I have spoken have served missions, and it is not until later that they begin to remember. One individual has memories of participating in rituals while serving as a full-time missionary. What does that tell us? Does it tell us that these individuals are being tracked? Could that be by the actual committee he's submitting this to? After all, we've got high-level priesthood leadership helping form the NSA, and if you have any idea what they're really like, the criminal nature of the privately owned NSA, privately owned CIA, privately owned governments, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Good film called Enemy of the State kind of helps portray what the NSA really does, how covert and evil they are. And when you look at people like Dallin Oaks as a chief recruiter, basically, for the CIA, FBI, and NSA, probably more verifiably just through the CIA. When he was head of Brigham Young University especially, you have to ask yourself, what are good Mormons doing in companies that specialize in murder and the violating of every decent aspect of society and what are considered human rights? The victims, to continue, lead relatively normal lives, or appear to, I would say, but the memories are locked up in a compartment in their minds and surface in various ways. They don't know how to cope with the emotions because they can't find the source. As they become adults, they move into another environment. Something triggers the memories, and consequently flashbacks and/or nightmares occur. One day they will be living a normal life, and the next day they'll be in a mental hospital in a fetal position. The memories of their early childhood are recalled in so much detail that they are once again feeling the pain that caused the dissociation in the first place. There are two reasons why adults can remember with such detail events that happened in their past. First, the terror they experienced was so stark that it was indelibly placed in their mind. Second, the memory was compartmentalized in a certain portion of the mind and was not subject to the dilution of experiences of ensuing years. When it is tapped, it is as fresh as if it happened yesterday. The memories seem to come in layers. For example, the first memory might be of incest. Then they remember robes and candles. Next, they realize that their father or mother, or both, were present when they were being abused. Another layer will be the memory of seeing other people hurt and even killed. Then they remember having seen babies killed. Another layer is realizing that they participated in the sacrifices. One of the most painful memories may be that they even sacrificed their own baby. When each layer of memory comes, another set of problems with which they must deal with each memory. Some have said that the witnesses to this type of treatment cannot be trusted because of the victim's unstable condition and because practically all of them have some kind of dissociative disorder. In fact, the stories are so bizarre as to raise serious credibility issues. The irony is that one of the objectives of the occult is to create multiple personalities within the children in order to keep the secrets. They live in society without society having any idea that something is wrong. Well, like being in the world but not of it. Where did that come from? They live in society without society having any idea that something is wrong, since the children and teenagers don't even realize there is another life. Remember, this is Bishop Pace of the presiding bishopric of the entire church. So I put him like, around number 18 in terms of power and authority in the LDS church at that time. Presiding bishopric right under the quorum of the 12, essentially, and then you got the 7 presidents of the 70. These are the guys, along with the first presidency, that are the top echelon of Mormon authority. And it sounds like he was not, knowingly part of the satanic inner core of the church. Just like William Law wasn't part of the spiritual wife system or the Council of 50 or anything like that in the earlier days of the church. However, he was in the first presidency, which he feels later was partially to make Joseph Smith and the guys look good because he had a good reputation. He was a solid guy, and he's the one who turned in Joseph Smith for the spiritual wife system. In the Expositor, which led to Joseph Smith's death after he caused a riot to destroy the press as the mayor of the town. Occurring in darkness and secret. However, when 60 witnesses testify to the same type of torture and murder, it becomes impossible for me, Bishop Pace, personally, not to believe them. I mention multiple personalities because the spiritual healing which must take place in the lives of these victims cannot happen without their priesthood leaders understanding something about it. Here Bishop Pace is starting to reveal his personal belief system here. But maybe we should just pause a minute to note the gravity of what he's discussed. This isn't a make-believe horror story or something that we're trained to believe this sort of thing is. What we're talking about is a large-scale reality of organized, premeditated torture within the satanic community, which is part of LDS church leadership, even according to Bishop Pace. Although he's not naming apostles here. Human sacrifice and forcing these individuals to participate and view it as they become at least initiated into Satanism through multiple personalities being developed systematically through trauma-based mind control. And this isn't a conspiracy website. This is from the heads of the LDS Church, who is testifying to the reality of this. So, as President Benson would have said, this is not conspiracy theory, this is conspiracy fact, when he spoke about secret combinations, which is what Bishop Pace is going to get into here. Continuing, Bishop Pace says, the spiritual indoctrination which takes place during the physical abuse is one of the most difficult to overcome. In addition to the experiencing of stark terror and pain, the children are also instructed in satanic doctrine. Everything is completely reversed. Black is white, white is black, good is bad, but, blah, blah, blah. Satan is going to rule during the millennium. Children are put in a situation where they believe they are going to die, such as being buried alive or being placed in a plastic bag and immersed in water. Prior to doing so, the abuser tells the child to pray to Jesus to see if he will save her. He says her because most of the victims were female in his interviews. Imagine a 7-year-old girl having been told she's going to die, praying to Jesus to save her, and nothing happens. That's pretty typical of Jesus. That's what happened with me. Then, at the last moment, she is rescued, but the person saving her is a representative of Satan. He uses this experience to convince her that the only person who really cares about her is Satan. She is Satan's child, and she might as well become loyal to him. Just before or shortly after their baptism into church, children are baptized by blood into the Satanic Order, which is meant to cancel out their baptism into the church. They will be asked if they understand or have ever felt the Holy Ghost. When they reply that they have, they will be reminded of the horrible things they have participated in and will be told that they have become a son or daughter of perdition, and therefore have no chance of being saved or loved by our Heavenly Father or Jesus. All of this indoctrination takes place with whichever personality has emerged to endure the physical, mental, and spiritual pain. Consequently, there develops within each of these individuals the makings of what I call a civil war, says Bishop Pace. As the memories begin to surface, there are personalities who feel they have given themselves to Satan, and there is no hope for forgiveness. The core person is an active member of the church. Did you get that? The core person is an active member of the church, often with a temple recommend. The integration takes place. The civil war begins. Sometimes in an interview, personalities of the dark side have come out. They are petrified, or perhaps full of hate for me and what I represent. Eventually, these personalities need to be dealt with spiritually and psychologically, says Bishop Pace. So these people are still being programmed into the belief that, the whole Christian Jesus thing is actually real. As we see, satanic bands doing too. They always push the Christian narrative. They just say we're the bad guys, that Satan's bad, Jesus is good, or something like that. And they continue to push the narrative of the Christian religion throughout our society. Most victims are suicidal, says Bishop Pace. They have been brainwashed with drugs, hypnosis, and other means to become suicidal as soon as they start to tell their secrets. So it's kind of a self-destruct program to help protect the satanic society. They have been threatened all of their lives that if they don't do what they are told, their brother or sister will die, their parents will die, their house will be burned, or they themselves will be killed. They have every reason to believe it since they have seen people killed. They believe they might as well kill themselves instead of wait for the occult to do it. Some personalities feel it is the right thing to do. The purpose of this detail is to stress the complexity of psychological and spiritual therapy for these individuals. Our priesthood leaders, when faced with such cases, are understandably at a loss of how to respond. Orthodox counsel is completely ineffective. For example, some victims have been told that this all happened in their past and that they should just put it behind them and get on with their lives. This is just not possible. Part of the spiritual therapy necessary for the priesthood leaders to assist with the conversion process of the personalities who have been indoctrinated into Satanism. Did I say that right? Victims must integrate their personalities so that they can function as whole persons and be able to deal with their problems, and then get on with their lives. Often some of the parts will begin to act out. Some of the various personalities, perhaps promiscuously. And a good-intentioned priesthood leader, following the general handbook of instruction, will disfellowship or excommunicate an individual. All this does is reinforce the satanic indoctrination of the victims that they are no good. So Bishop Pace basically is telling us that these priesthood leaders don't have the gift of discernment and all these spiritual gifts and the mantle of bishop that they're supposed to have. Otherwise, they would have the inspiration to know how to deal with this. But these are his opinions as to the nature of the problem and the nature of what he considers to be a solution based on LDS theology and so forth. Says Glenn, I'm sorry to say that many of the victims have had their first flashbacks while attending the temple for the first time. Now, why could that be? Well, he's going to tell us why he thinks that is. The occult along the Wasatch Front uses the doctrines of the church to their advantage. Well, the doctrines of the temple came from the occult, Glenn. For example, the verbiage and gestures are used in a ritualistic ceremony in a very debased and often bloody manner. Well, the signs and tokens and penalties came from Freemasonry, which is one of the secret societies or secretive societies with some serious evil secrets. That's where this stuff came from, Glenn. Okay? This came from the occult. Your penalties are horrific in the temple. They've been eliminated April 1990, 4 years after the Blue Lodge and Freemasonry did it, and Gordy Hinckley followed suit of his, British superiors in Freemasonry. But they're extremely gory, bloody, and demonic. And so, yeah, that's where this stuff comes from. When the victim goes to the temple and hears the exact words, horrible memories are triggered. We have recently been disturbed with members of the church who talked about the temple ceremony. Compared to what is happening in the occult along the Wasatch Front, these are very minor infractions. The perpetrators are also living a dual life. Many are temple recommend holders. So you just said the perpetrators. Okay? The perpetrators are temple recommend holders much of the time, according to Bishop Pace. This leads to another reason why the church needs to consider the seriousness of these problems. In effect, the church is being used. I go out of my way to not let the victims give me the names of the perpetrators. Really? These people are committing murder and you are going out of your way to basically make sure they don't get prosecuted, Glenn? That's pretty messed up, I think. I have told them that my responsibility is to help them with spiritual healing, and that the names of perpetrators should be given to therapists. Okay. I think Glenn just wanted to kind of stay out of the middle of that one. However, they have told me the positions in the church of members who are perpetrators. Among others, they are young women leaders. young men leaders, bishops, a patriarch, a stake president, temple workers, and members of the tabernacle choir. These accusations are not coming from individuals who think they recognize someone, but from those who have been abused by people that they know. In many cases, their own family members. Yeah, that's the way it works in satanic generational Satanism, Glenn. However, the form of abuse, our main concern, is for the victims, but there are legal ramifications. We are disturbed to receive reports that a scoutmaster has abused the boys in his troop. It is not difficult to imagine what would happen if we learned that a bishop or stake president has participated in the abominations of ritualistic child abuse. Well, he just said they did learn that. Not only do some of the perpetrators represent a cross-section of the Mormon culture, but sometimes the abuse has taken place in our own meeting houses. Yeah. Jonathan was talking about bishops that are molesting children that they're interviewing. Not all bishops are like that, of course. Not all bishops are part of the satanic religion or generational Satanism. But there are plenty that are. And they look like regular folk. They don't have horns on their head. Otherwise, we wouldn't have guys that are bishops, stake presidents, temple recommend holding members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, temple workers, all these people that people trust in church and in business. They trust with their children as their Boy Scout leaders. My son's local mission leader, when he was a missionary in the ward that he was in, a fellow that I met, a real great guy with a real great family, found that his son had been sexually molested at Boy Scout camp by his priesthood leaders in the LDS church. As usual, nothing is done about it. I believe he wound up sacrificing his career in some lawsuit with the church over their treatment of this. Because as usual, they just cover up, just like the Catholics with their pedophile priesthood. Continuing on, after Glenn states it's taking place actually in the church buildings sometimes. I don't pretend, says Bishop Pace, to know how prevalent the problem is. All I know is that I've met with 60 victims. Remember, he was limiting this to one person per week. Assuming each one comes from right here on the Wasatch Front, obviously I have only seen those coming forth to get help. They are in their 20s and 30s for the most part. I can only assume that there is expanding geometrically their number. And I am horrified the numbers represented by the generation who are now children and teenagers. Another reason for concern is that there are several doctrinal issues that need to be resolved. And it goes on here to say that the church and society in general are very skeptical as to whether the occult and its activities even exist. Like I said, that's thanks to television. There is no first presidency statement relative to some of the doctrinal issues. What does the priesthood leader tell the individuals who come forward and say that they've participated in these rituals, which may include human sacrifice? 75% of the people said that to him. Should they have a temple recommend? Will they ever be forgiven? There are questions regarding free agency and accountability. Is a person who has been raised in an occult environment from infancy accountable for these things that take place in a dissociated state? Seriously, Glenn. Even though those acts were committed after the age of 8, you see how this guy's mind-washed himself. I have formed my own opinions to these questions and have done the best I can. However, I don't have the mantle to make these doctrinal and policy decisions. I've relied on the mantle of a bishop regarding discernment and being a common judge. Looks to me like Glenn truly believes in this whole, LDS theology, that he doesn't look like he's a phony. He looks like he really actually believes this stuff, but he can't seem to figure out why there aren't any priesthood guidelines on how to deal with this. Where's Jesus been? Why didn't Jesus show them that this problem existed, long ago before so many lives were ruined? And how do you deal with this stuff? And he's ready to hold an 8-year-old accountable for murder when they've been mind controlled. The dude has some serious brainwashing problems himself if he's going to believe that kind of thing. Then again, believing that an 8-year-old should be, liable to contract for life to give 10% of their, earnings or gifts to a multi-billion-dollar corporation is insane. There's a reason why you got to be 18 to sign contracts. 8, that's ridiculous, but that's what kids are basically roped into in the LDS Church. They're fully accountable by the time they're 8. Yeah. I even seen in the scriptures it says begin to become accountable, but no, they're going to contract with you for 10% right as soon as you get 8. God just seems to have a problem with money. The few priesthood leaders have had face-to-face these issues are crying out for help because they don't want to give their own opinions, and yet there's no place to go for an answer. Yeah, what happened to inspiration? A bishop will go to a stake president who says he just doesn't believe it is even happening and that the member is just crazy. The stake president might go to an area presidency who will react in a similar way. Most people are afraid to surface it to the first presidency for fear of getting the same reaction and don't want to appear crazy themselves for asking the question. I hope you'll excuse me if I'm being presumptuous, but I'm concluding this paper with scriptures. I feel support my belief that these activities are real and cannot be ignored. So from there on, Bishop Pace gets into LDS scripture regarding secret combinations, which basically describe the Illuminati and high-level Freemasonry very accurately. So once again, this is where Ezra Taft Benson said this isn't conspiracy theory, this is conspiracy fact, and challenged people to read the book called None Dare Call It Conspiracy, which doesn't really focus on secret societies, but it focuses on NGOs and control of banking, focuses on the Council on Foreign Relations and Royal House of International Affairs and the Round Table, Bilderberg Group. Actually, I didn't even mention the Bilderbergs, I think, but some of these powerful committees where policy is influenced and politicians basically drawn from cabinet members, certainly. I remember when Ronald Reagan was, elected, and then I looked at his cabinet, and I think every one of the guys was CFR. And I was like, wow, I think we know the way things are going to continue to go, just like they did when Nixon had the same, and basically everybody else. So Glenn tells us that these scriptures tell us that these things will be occurring in the latter days. So believing Latter-day Saints should have read these things, should have especially read the account in the book of Ether, chapter 8, which tells us that this conspiracy will seek to destroy the freedom of all people, all nations and lands, basically. And that gets into what a lot of people call the New World Order, and we're trained in the media to believe that that's some kind of conspiracy theory thing. But then when we listen to, multiple U.S. presidents giving their accolades to the New World Order, naming it specifically, including George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and George Bush Jr., GW, calling it what it's called in Latin on the back of the U.S. dollar bill, the New Order of the Ages. And they're referencing it from their obvious occult perspective when they discuss how many generations we've waited for the establishment of the New World Order, the New Order of the Ages. So I'm going to play a little clip from one of my videos on that. 60 individuals, one per week, and he continued a little longer after this occurred and interviewed quite a number of other individuals, once again limiting those to one per week because his primary responsibilities in the bishopric as the bishop of the church, or in his case I believe second counselor, one of 3 presiding bishops, tends to be what the church calls temporal, or in other words, financial affairs of the church, and probably, overseeing the management of the welfare system, as it's called, with the bishop's storehouses, which Christy Allen says are outlets for kiddie porn. She was involved in MK Ultra mind control projects. She was a Latter-day Saint, and has a very compelling story which goes along with what we're told by Bishop Pace, who just didn't get into the actual stories, but I'm going to probably play a couple of clips that are involved with that. I think now what I'm going to do actually is just jump over to one of my web pages, or a couple of them here, which are having to do with the subjects that we're looking at here. So the first one we're going to look at is going to be LDS, JW, and Catholic satanic ritualistic pedophilia in the Luciferian Masonic network. And what I said those other individuals were failing to do in their compartmentalized view of particular problems, including mind control, pedophilia cover-up, and inappropriate interviewing of children, which leads to pedophilia and suicide through indoctrination and grooming kids for situations where it will be more easily where they would be more easily victimized by these predators, who often are members of the occult, because these sexually depraved acts and human sacrifice are actually part of the inner religion of Satanism, which guides the LDS, JW, and Catholic churches, and whose members we see at the heads of many corporations, including our privately owned governments, state, city, county, and national. So here we got Anthony Bourdain, who was recently murdered, no doubt. Anthony Bourdain was about to expose an elite pedophile ring before he died. Leaked documents detail Mormon church cover-up of sexual assault. If you don't know who Anthony Bourdain is, he did a lot of investigative stuff, and he did some nice kind of travel things on CNN. I'm not a CNN fan generally, but I liked watching his adventures in various places throughout the world, where he's drinking caipirinha in Brazil and hanging out on the beach and playing volleyball, or going to Lebanon, or wherever he goes, as part of CNN's inculcating us with globalist thinking. He seemed to be a man that had some character, and that cost him his life, is what it's seen here. So we're going to see all sorts of political and religious leaders here flashing satanic signs. Homosexual prostitution inquiry ensnares VIPs with Reagan and Bush. The White House, their boy, the little boys going into the White House, kind of like President Hinckley was noted for having. I'll read a little bit of what I got on this page, and also, like all the pages on my website, I've got numerous videos generally that pertain to the subjects involved, having to do normally with LDS truth and authority claims, because the LDS Church claims to be guided by the God of Israel, who is unchanging and honest and true, and inspires these brethren who seem to be just covering up and rewriting history as fast as they can manage to do that, along with making policy changes that bring them in line with the goals of the Lucifer or Lucis Trust, which gives us our politically correct guidelines and guides the World Council of Churches, which the LDS Church joined, and so did the JWs in 2013, and pretty much all your leading religions bowing to the Pope underneath this organization to meld all Christian-style religions, at least, into a one-world religion. Is that conspiracy theory? Do the research, people. Okay, why is it that year after year we have the same pattern of cover-up by not just the many churches and other offending charitable organizations of their massive proliferation of pedophile priests, elders, and youth leaders, but the cooperation of police, judges, federal and local agencies, and other alleged public servants or credentialed professionals? Can the fact that the evidence supporting the victims is constantly being swept under the rug all be attributed to the massive wealth held by the Roman Catholic, the Watchtower, and the LDS churches, and the use of bribery, blackmail, and church affiliation of public officials? Or is there an additional, less visible interconnecting network based in the occult linking these organizations and others, which is responsible for such effective silencing of the victims and causing it to appear as though we just have a few bad apples who fooled gatekeepers and policy meant to protect the vulnerable from sexual predators and satanic ritual abuse, SRA, which they continue to suffer? The fact of the matter is that the odds of such phenomenal success of hiding and protecting such predators who flourish in the above-mentioned religious and charitable organizations, along with others such as the Boy Scouts and within Freemasonry itself and other organizations in which Masons, Jesuits, and other occultists hold positions of power, is beyond any reasonable likelihood of being attributable to chance or happenstance. And though media hounds and other authority figures would cry persecution and conspiracy theory to discredit those people who bother to research the facts and present them, the facts are what they are, and it is incumbent upon us to make the effort to investigate them despite the use of such techniques employed to discourage us in the pursuit of truth and justice regarding the rampant human trafficking for sexual slavery and satanic ritual sacrifices, with the many missing persons that are used up by our leading politicians and corrupt public and religious leaders in the network. Pause to take a look at a few of these, pictures I've got here depicting Satanism and Satanists that you will recognize. In the middle, we got John Kerry, Skull and Bonesman, ran for president of the United States, pictured there with Anton LaVey, head of the Church of Satan, who we also see on the left in one of their meetings. Michelle Obama throwing the horns, Reagan, Michael Jackson. Above we saw Bill Clinton. Did we see Bill? Come on, Bill. Now we see George Bush, Obama, Anthony Bourdain, who's not one of the boys throwing the horns. We got Trump throwing all kinds of satanic and Illuminati signs there. Dan Quayle, Anton LaVey, the Pope, and Putin doing a Masonic handshake like you do in the temple. The Pope and, what's his face? It was Tony Blair. Different token of the priesthood. because they're all copied from Freemasonry. Dick Cheney throwing the satanic horns. Bill George and Obama talking. Some satanic stuff going down here on the left. And more Satanism. And then we got Bush and Monson. And below them, Hinckley and Cheney, both using the patriarchal grip there, the sure sign of the nail, or the third degree Master Mason's grip, which Joseph Smith copied into Mormonism, gave it a different name, and associated it with various covenants in the LDS Temple of Doom, as Bill, what's the name, Snowjob, whatever he says. Here we're looking at some satanic ritual stuff going on. There's the Pope giving one of the tokens to one of his pals. And Robert Schuller, popular evangelist, kind of from the past at this point, passed on his empire to kids, giving one of those same tokens used in Freemasonry and the Mormon temple ritual to Mikhail Gorbachev. Very good. Yeah, a little blow up here. Bush and Monson in the grip, and by a pentagram inside of a Maltese cross pictured from the temple, along with the picture, a representation of Baal, the sun god, there below, and then inverted satanic pentagrams on the sides of the one in the Maltese cross. There's so much satanic symbolism on the LDS Church, and since words and symbols are often given dual meanings in order to disguise them for public consumption, we have LDS apologists that will bullshit you as to the origin of these things, trying to make it look like Brigham Young and Joseph Smith didn't know what the hell they're doing as Freemason occultists. All right. We got Bill with Kid Rock, Gene Simmons, Bush again, and Hollywood folk showing us their orientation. The most important question to be answered now is, do you personally have the integrity to exercise the free agency to investigate this stuff, huh? In this page and others, including the subjects of mind control, these are hyperlinks there, mind control and secret combinations found in the Mormon Truth videos, Gospel Topics Hub website, The Seeker of Truth, and especially the Mormon Truth Seeker, will find ample resources to begin to understand how different a world we live in than what they told us at church. And I should say church and school and the media. The most important questions to be answered now is, do you personally have the integrity and courage to take responsibility to know and acting upon the truth and exercise your agency in the affirmative, rather than fall to the mind control spawned and fear-fueled cognitive dissonance used by the NLP masters who lead these churches and tell you that Satan the devil is trying to grab you when you view non-church approved materials which hold leaders accountable for their doublespeak, rewriting of church history, and cover-ups. Pictured on the left under the Pope and above the San Diego Temple, we have Presiding Bishop Glenn Pace, who published findings of 60 interviews, which we just did some reading of, 75% of which said they had to view or participate in human sacrifice. All right. With other temple-attending Mormons, including priesthood and young women's leaders, bishopric, stake presidency, patriarch, members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and all of these people, of course, were selected by higher-up church leaders whom we are told have the gift of discernment as part of their high and holy calling. Yeah, the beginning of page 1 of the memorandum is pictured under the temple and bishop face. Okay, so then I got some videos that I've done in here. I've only got actually 1 or 2 in here yet, but I'm going to throw this one in there. CIA Mind Control, Kathy O'Brien, Mark Phillips. Very revealing. I like the Christy Allen one. We've got that probably under the Mind Control page here. and she was MK'd. Cult Mind Control, Kingdoms of Satan, Yahweh, and Mormonism. And I'm not going to read this one for us here, but I invite all to partake. We've got some good information in here, a lot of videos regarding mind control used in Mormonism. Most at the bottom here. Hello. Yeah, so here's Christy Allen. She's LDS, SRA survivor. It wasn't just SRA. It was MK Ultra, CIA project. So I don't think I'm going to read that stuff here in this video because it'll be too long. Maybe I'll do that in another one. In the meantime, I think what I'm going to do is part 2 most of this stuff and not get into the corporate structure which allows all these things to be networked together. Here we got the Pope. Did he shield pedophile priests? Oh yes. When has there ever been a Pope who wasn't a pedophile himself? So, the Luciferian nature of Freemasonry. The church doesn't want us to talk about Freemasonry. It doesn't want us to know what a satanic organization it is. They don't want us to read these stories of this abuse that's taking place. This website here is documenting various more of these stories coming forth. Typical of what Glenn Pace is telling us is very real. Not all of these talk about Satanism, but they are, most of them, talking about the cover-up of sexual perversion, abuse, and pedophilia within the LDS Church as a rampant problem. Now, this gentleman here, Bill Schnoebellum, or whatever the heck his name is, was a high priest in the church and also a Druid high priest. He was in the Church of Satan and a witch before he joined the LDS Church, and has since left the LDS Church. But let's listen to a couple minutes of something he says that I think is less likely for you to throw out as conspiracy or born-again Christian made-up bullshit, because you've now at least seen that Bishop Pace is testifying that, yeah, this really is real. And I've had people come forth to me and tell me things about their connections or family members in the satanic religion in the LDS Church. And then they try to, usually get rid of the tracks on the internet to who they are because they're afraid. And somehow Bill hasn't been assassinated, like Bill Clinton's enemies generally are, or many people that try to come out of the Church of Satan. I wonder how that couple's doing that I met when I was younger, who, came out. She'd been a witch and observed, participated in orgies in the Church of Satan and watched children, orgy babies, be sacrificed.
What happened is I went on to college. I was going to minor seminary college to become a priest. And all this time I kind of had a side interest in like UFOs and parapsychology and haunted houses, all of these things that are kind of at the outer, if you will, the outer innocent, quote unquote, fringe of the occult. And I had a professor, a theology, a doctor, and a priest, theological doctor, tell me, one of my teachers, that if I wanted to be Christ-like, which of course a priest is supposed to be Christ-like, I should study the occult, because that's what, Lord did. This guy, I never heard any of this, he told me that, Jesus, quote unquote, went to India to study with the gurus, and he went to Tibet to study with the lamas, and he went to Egypt to study with the magicians there, and that's how he was able to do all the stuff he was able to do. Well, what did I know? I was like 18 or 19 years old. I didn't know the Bible very well, of course, because I was a Catholic, and I believed the guy. And so I started studying the occult, and within a couple of years, by the time I was like a sophomore at this college, I wrote to the king of the witches over in England and asked to become a witch. So I was studying for the Catholic priesthood, but I also was studying to be a witch. And I got initiated in 1968 as a witch. And then I took a leave of absence from the Catholic Church, from the seminary, after I graduated from college with a degree in music and education and philosophy. And I went off and went to Boston, where the nearest coven was at that time, to become a high priest in Wicca, which is white witchcraft. And then from there, the problem with the occult is it's never enough. Occultism, magical power is like a drug, is what I tell people. And you get a little, you want more. You get more, you want a little more. And it keeps going. And that's how the devil works with any addiction. And I would submit to you that the magical power, which is real, it comes from the demonic, but it's totally real, that it's one of the most addictive things of all, because it gives you the illusion you have control over your life, even though you don't. Because obviously you're a slave to Lucifer. You're a slave to the evil one, but he don't care, He just chews you up and spits you out. So anyway, went down to Arkansas to study under the Grand Master Druid of North America, and he told me he was a 33rd degree Mason. He was also a Mormon bishop, and he told me that if I wanted to really understand the mysteries of Lucifer, I should become a Master Mason, and he told me that if I ever got in any kind of serious spiritual trouble, I should join the Mormon Church. So I kind of, filed the latter part away, because I knew nothing about the Mormon Church. I mean, all I knew, they had a choir and they had a lot of wives. That's what I thought, Right. So anyway, went through this. I was now in the 70s. I got involved with the Church of Satan. I got involved with hardcore Satanism. I got involved with even the vampire thing, because at one point I had to, if I wanted to progress within the kingdom of darkness, within the brotherhood, as it's called, of Satan, I had to choose. I could either go one way and become a lycanthrope or a werewolf, or I could go the other way and become a vampire. And I chose to become a vampire because it seemed, sexier somehow. And so anyhow, I went through about a year and a half where basically I lived on nothing but human blood and Catholic communion waivers. That's all I ate. And then something amazing happened. Every year I was sending a check to the Church of Satan that get their newsletter. Believe it or not, they had a newsletter then, and I'm sure it's now online, but it was called the Cloven Hoof. And I got the check back from the bank, and some lady in the bank out at San Francisco, where the Church of Satan did its banking at that time, had written on the check, "I'll be praying for you in Jesus' name." And of course, I just laughed at it, because at that point I was so deceived. I thought that Yahushua, Jesus Christ, was the son of Satan. He had died on the cross as a human sacrifice to save the world from the evil Jehovah. That's what I was taught.
Gnosticism, basically, yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. Kind of the whole demiurge thing. So, right. And by the way, I was also a Gnostic bishop. So I know what you're talking about. You're talking about Gnosticism, but that was a couple of years before this. So anyway, I just laughed at this check, threw it in the bank, and within a couple of days, I was flat. It's like all my magical power left me. I lost my job. I felt sick as a dog. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was one of the most powerful magicians, sorcerers, whatever word you want to use, in the whole western coast of Lake Michigan. Because at this time I was living in Milwaukee, and I didn't know what was going on, so I asked Lucifer for a sign. And another amazing thing happened, because what happened is the next day I got a phone call from these two girls that lived down in Chicago, which is a short, train ride up from from down. They're down. We're up in Milwaukee. And they want to know if they can come and visit me because I was this great satanic priest and blah, 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 all that. So I said, sure. They said they had something to give me as an offering. And I thought, well, whatever, So they came, and when they got in the door, they're like two teenage girls that worship the devil. And, what was really bizarre is they gave me these two Christian comic books about the occult. They were from Chick Publications. One is called Spellbound, and the other one is called Angel of Light, and they were both about the dangers of the occult. And they said, you got to read these things. They're so dumb. They're absolutely Neanderthal. And that was their great gift to me, And of course, I just looked at them, I thought they were totally stupid and threw them in a drawer and forgot about them. Well, the next day, there was a knock on our door, and we opened the door, and it was Mormon missionaries, And I remember what this Druid guy had said, Grandmaster Druid of North America. Have I ever got into trouble that I should join the Mormon Church because they were started by witches for witches. And, at the time, again, like I said, I didn't know much about the Mormon Church. But this is the sign from Lucifer. This is a sign. And so invited them in, took the lessons, watched the flip charts, got baptized. That was, it was August of 1980. Went to the temple. Salt Lake Temple in 1981, and basically rose up, and I'd given up smoking dope. I'd given up all the orgies and stuff. I tried to be a good Mormon, in other words, because Mormons basically try to live a good Christian lifestyle, quote unquote. Of course, they don't know the real Savior from a doorknob, right. But they're trying, kind of like Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, anyway, in the Mormon Church. And I mean, we can expand on any of these things as you'd like, but within the Mormon Church, I began to realize things were not well. I realized I rose through the ranks. I became an elders quorum president, which is kind of like the assistant to a bishop. And I was going out and home teaching. There's a thing in the church, at least there was back in the 80s, where the elders would go and visit everybody in the congregation. It's called a ward. Every month to see how they're doing. Do you need your sidewalk shoveled like if it's a senior citizen? Do you need your lawn mowed? Can we clean out your gutters? And also to check up on you, to make sure you're not drinking coffee or smoking cigarettes or, hiding pornography under your bed or something like that. So, it's kind of like, and I discovered that even though the Mormon Church present this wonderful, clean-cut, all-American image, we're all successful, we're all like Mitt Romney, blah, 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 And it's true, there are a lot of very wealthy Mormons. They're very well educated, too, and I certainly give them credit for that. But the point is, there were a lot of Mormons that weren't going to church, that felt so discouraged, so disgusted, with the whole thing, because there's like all these thousands of commandments, literally over 4,000 commandments the Mormons have to keep. If they don't keep them, they don't get into the highest degree of heaven. If they can't go to the temple, and again, just to briefly explain something, in the Mormon Church you have meeting houses which are open to anybody, just like any church would be. But then you have temples, and they are more rare. There's now probably 20 or 30 of them in the whole of North America. Where only elite Mormons are allowed to go. And the Mormons are taught that if you don't go to the temple and take out your endowments and get your secret name and blah, 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 you aren't getting into the highest degree of heaven. You're basically stuck in the cheap seats with all the devout Baptists and Lutherans and Catholics and Buddhists and Hindus and whatever. Right. So I was one of the elite. I went through the temple. And the temple is highly Luciferian. Highly Luciferian in its nature. But at the time, I thought that was okay because I had been led to believe the Mormon Church was started by witches. Right. So that was no big surprise to me. But what was a surprise to me is that there were all these people that were basically dying on the vine. They weren't able to get victory over the vices in their lives. They weren't able to walk in any kind of joy or shalom, peace, anything like that. That's because they don't have the real Holy Spirit. Right. But I didn't know that. So anyway, and many of your listeners may not know this, but most Mormon clergy do not get paid. They work a full-time job, 40 hours a week, and then they work another 20, 30, 40 hours a week for the church, absolutely free. That's dedication. Yeah. I give them credit for that. Not many, Christian pastors would do that. So anyway, I was really wearing myself out because I was working like 60, 70 hours a week. And one night I came home from home teaching, and one thing the Mormons get right, they do use the King James Bible. And I opened my Bible and just happened to fall open to Matthew chapter. Yeah, let's put a pin in that, and let me make one other point about the previous subject.
Okay.
What I didn't know when I was a Mormon, but I found out later on in 1986 and 1987 when I was out in Salt Lake preaching, doing this Christian conference for my dear friend Ed Decker, is that Joseph Smith has been historically established to not only be a Freemason, but to be a witch, to be a warlock, if you want to call him that, a sorcerer. There's this Mormon historian, D. Michael Quinn, who was since excommunicated from the church, but he was a BYU professor. And he wrote this book called Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, and I have a copy of it. It's now out of print, but it's this thick. And the guy documents all the weird stuff, occultism, crystal balls, fortune telling, talismans, necromancy, animal sacrifice that Joseph Smith was involved in. And this is a guy who's supposedly a prophet of God,
Right.
quote unquote.
Right.
And he was basically a con man. And he was probably demon possessed to his eyeballs. So, I just want people to understand that the thing that this Druid guy told me back in 1973 about the Mormon church being founded by witches wasn't just somebody, blowing smoke up your skirt.
Right.
He was telling the truth.
Yeah.
And he knew because he himself was an LDS bishop. So, that being said, moving on to the Masonry. The thing about Masonry is Masons say they are not a religion, but only religious. And that's just playing word games.
Right.
And, basically Masonry has all the qualities of religion. It requires you to believe in a supreme being. It has a system of morality. There's things you can do and things you cannot do. And that system of morality and ethics is expressed in ritual. It's very ritualized. No Mason can deny that. So Masonry is a religion, and I would put it to anybody who's supposedly a Christian and a Mason. How can you be a part of two religions at once? I mean, you couldn't be a Christian and a Muslim. You couldn't be a Christian and a Hindu. You couldn't be a Christian and be a Buddhist. So why would you be a Christian and be a Freemason? Now, the danger of it is, and we have a DVD which expresses this very well. It's called Freemasonry, Fatal in the First Degree. And people can get that off. A little plug here for our website. Our website is withoneaccord.org. We have a lot of free stuff there. We have all of my books and DVDs. I've written 8 books, and I've done countless. I could have probably 30 or 40 DVD teachings now. Plus, we're also on YouTube and on Facebook, all of that. But anyway, in this DVD, I document how even the first degree. See, let's say you're a Christian, and you decide to join the lodge because your uncle was in it or a friend was in it. Maybe your pastor was in it. And he tells you, oh, it's a great institution. It makes good men better. Yeah. That's what
I've heard that a lot, yeah.
Yeah, that's their little slogan. So anyway, you go there, you're interviewed by a committee to make sure you're not some kind of a pervert or something. That's another story, but and I'm sure, you were talking before about, your friend David Carrico, our mutual friend.
Right.
And, we'll both confirm to you that Masons actually have the highest number of pedophiles, perverts. I mean, they put the Catholic priesthood to shame.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to David Carrico about that. He was here locally. I don't know if you're familiar with the Blue House, the Satanic Blue House, but they were one of the ones that broke it out. But they uncovered that Freemasons were the ones that were bringing these children away from the school, and they were doing sexual, not sacrifices, but rituals, satanic rituals on these children and bringing them back to the school. And it was happening at all these different schools, and all the people that were doing were Freemasons. So I can't, it's just, look, when I heard about that, I was like, wow, that is outrageous. I cannot believe that. It's so crazy, but it's true. And I looked it up, and It's in the newspaper. It happened a few, I think I want to say like almost 15 years ago here in our town. And man, it's just, it's crazy. So.
Yeah. And I mean, we've prayed for thousands, probably, 5,000, 6,000 people now to be set free from the demonic. And so many of them come from Masonic homes where the father, the grandfather, the uncle was Mason. They were sexually molested as children, boys, girls, doesn't matter. And I'll get to why that is in a moment. But anyway, they interview you, and then you're a Christian, or maybe you're a deacon or an elder, whatever, in a church, and you're taken to the door of the lodge. They take off all your clothes. They put these jammies on you with a bare breast. One of your knees is bare. It's like one of the legs is a short leg, and you're blindfolded. You got a rope around your neck. And they're being led to the door of the lodge. You knock on the door, and you're made to say, the guy on the other side of the door, you're blindfolded. The guy comes and says, "Who comes here?" from the other side of the door. And you're made to say by this guy who's conducting you, who's a lodge officer, "Mr. Bill Schneblin, who has long been in darkness and now seeks to be brought to light, to receive a part in the rights and benefits of this worshipful lodge, erected to God and dedicated to the holy saints John, as all brothers and fellows have done before me." Now, notice what you just said. You're a Christian, and you're saying you've long been in darkness.
Right.
And this is the first thing you've done. You aren't even inside the lodge yet, and you've already denied Yahushua, Jesus Christ, who's the light of the world.
Yeah.
How bad is that?
Yeah.
It gets worse. You go inside the lodge. You're led around the lodge. Again, you're blindfolded. All this weird ritual stuff is done, You're made to kneel at an altar. At the altar, you're told to put your hands on a Bible, and you swear an oath. Now, in Matthew 5:34-37, Yahushua says, "Don't swear oaths. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything more than that cometh of evil." And that's, what do you want to call it? That's built upon by his half-brother James. In James's epistle, he says, "Above all things, my brethren, swear no oaths." That's pretty strong.
Yeah.
And so here you are, supposedly a follower of Christ, supposedly, whatever, and you're swearing an oath in direct contravention of his commandments.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets worse. You're kneeling at this altar, you're swearing this oath, and it's all this kind of long mumbo jumbo stuff, and it's very legalese. And at the end you say, got your hand on the Bible, "All this I most solemnly and sincerely promise and swear, binding myself under no less a penalty than that of having my throat cut across, my tongue torn out by its roots, and buried in the sands of the sea, where the tide ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours, shall I ever knowingly violate this my entered apprentice oath." That's what the first degree is called, entered apprentice. "So help me God, and keep me steadfast in the due performance of the same." Now, that's pretty blood-curdling.
Yeah, it is.
And the Masons say, "Oh, well, it's only symbolic." Well, the trouble is, if it's only symbolic, then you've taken the name of Yahweh, of the Lord, in vain.
Mm-hmm.
If, on the other hand, it's for real, then you violated another one of the Ten Commandments, because it says, "Thou shalt not kill." And you're basically saying, if I do blah, blah, I'm giving you permission to cut my throat and tear my tongue out by the roots, which usually is fatal.
Yeah.
So, right then and there, you've opened, as a man, because women can't be Masons, a huge open doorway for Satan to come in and trouble you. Now, here's the other thing. If you study, and you see, the trouble is most Masons are like most Christians. Just like most Christians never read the Bible, most Masons never read their own books. Every Masonic library that I have ever been in, I've been in a dozen of them, Masonic Lodge, has a library. And when I became a Scottish Rite Mason, I went to the Scottish Rite Library in Milwaukee. It's beautiful. It's huge. Probably 4,000 or 5,000 volumes, easy. You read these books, you know what you discover? You discover, Masons talk about their deity being the great architect of the universe. Well, really, if you read their books, their deity is symbolized by the obelisk. Like Washington was a Freemason, George Washington was a Freemason. The Washington Monument is the world's biggest phallic symbol. That is the deity of the Masonic Lodge. They basically worship the phallus. That's why they wear an apron, because the apron covers their Holy of Holies. And they don't tell people this up front, because most Protestants and even most just plain old secular people would be kind of shocked by it. You guys worship the phallus, but yeah, they do. And, and I don't think we have the time to get into all of that, but, basically it all goes back to the legend of Osiris and Isis and the missing master's word, which is actually, that Osiris's, male member had been cut off and lost, and Isis couldn't find it. Right. And this is the problem with Masonry, is because whether these guys know it or not, they're worshiping the male organ, and that opens up a doorway for the devil to come in and trouble them in that very area. And you know as well as I do, most men have some trouble with that anyway. I mean, we all struggle with, sexual temptation and whatnot, but this is like blowing the door wide open for just any unrighteous thing to come in, demons, perversity, and for whatever reason, Masons, and basically at the highest level, and mind you, probably one in 1,000 Masons knows this. Even most 33rd degree Masons don't know this. The idea that you learn, because Masonry is basically an energy vampire thing, where all the energy goes up to the top, and at the top is Lucifer. But right below the top, and we get into all of this in this book I wrote, Masonry Beyond the Light, there's this idea that Masons can achieve immortality by sexually vampirizing children.
Is it because they're still in their innocence, or how is that?
They're still in their innocence, and they're still full of life force. I mean, if you take a 5-year-old boy or a 5-year-old girl, for that matter, and you violate them sexually, you've stolen their innocence, but you've also stolen all those years of life force. That means you can live that much longer. I'm not saying this is true. This is what they're taught.
Right.
And they talk about, when you do Masonic ritual, you're taught about the sure and certain hope of immortality. Well, they never mentioned Jesus ever in the lodge, except in 1 degree, and that's in the York Rite Commandery. Otherwise, you never hear it. And let me just ask you this: where are you going to get immortality except through Christ?
Nowhere, man. That's a lie from the Garden of Eden, the serpent's lie. You can become like gods. So
all the way forward. So that is the danger of Masonry. And there's more to it than that. I spent a whole 2 chapters in this book, Masonry Beyond the Light, talking about in so many ways that Masonry is anti-Christian, it's anti-Bible, it's even anti-family, because it requires the Master Mason, or even the Entered Apprentice, 1st degree guy, to keep things from his wife.
Right.
I don't even know if you're married, but
I am. I'm married. Been married for 10 years. So
hallelujah. Yeah. That's great. But you don't keep stuff from your wife.
No.
Not in my marriage manual, because that is a toxic thing that can eat away, whether it's a woman keeping something from her husband or whether it's a husband keeping something from his wife. It eats away at the fabric of the trust, which I would say is one of the key foundation pillars of any marriage.
I agree.
So right then and there, you go to your lodge meeting, you come home and say, "Oh, honey, what did you do in your lodge?" Well, I can't tell you. She's going to start wondering, do you have orgies there? And no, please understand me. Masons don't have orgies.
Right.
But I will tell you this. We've had, I bet, at least 200 people testify to us that during the off hours, when the lodges close, quote unquote, the children testify now as adults of being taken to the lodge and being sodomized, being ritualized, sexually abused on the very altar where that Holy Bible sits during regular Masonic rituals. And their cries and their screams and any blood that might even be shed is offered up to the Elohim, the false god of Masonry, which is Baal. Because if you want to get back to the basics, I mean, this phallic symbol is Baal, right, who's the ultimate, he is, I think, the ultimate false deity that surrounded Israel under several names like Moloch and Chemosh and whatnot. Right. And that's what they're worshiping. And most Masons don't know that. No, and because of that, and I tell people this, just because you don't know it's cyanide, if you drink a glass of water thinking it's poison, it's still going to kill you. And not only will it hurt the man, it will trickle down and contaminate his family, his wife, his children, even if he never touches his children sexually. The headship is so defiled because of this filth that's pouring into him when he kneels at that altar and swears an oath to Baal. And like Elijah said in 1 Kings 18, how long halt ye between two opinions? If Yahweh is God, serve him. If Baal is God, serve him. And I would tell you that the Mason is trying to do both if he's a Christian, and he can't do it.
Yeah, man. I know that the thing you're talking about, the head of the household, though, whether a man wants to admit it or wants to claim it, no matter what, he is the head spiritually of the household. And when you do stuff like that, you're absolutely right. It completely defiles your home and everything like that. So I know that my first encounter, I guess, with Freemasonry was my uncle was Shriner and also Scottish Rite. I guess he was like the higher level Scottish Rite and Shriner. And I don't know if he started out, I guess you have to start out in Freemasonry before you go to the Shriners. So he was probably that too. And,
well, let me just explain that. You got to go through the Blue Lodge, which is the first 3 degrees. And then you come out and go Scottish Rite, which is 32 degrees, or you go York Rite, which is 10 degrees. You said your uncle was in the Scottish Rite. Then you go into the Shrine.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, I was outside one day. I was helping this local church, and I was passing out waters for people, and they were trying to build a church there. So I was helping the guy that started because I knew the guy. And we were right by the Shriners tent because they have the downtown in our area. They have this huge building, and they own like half the city block downtown there. So like there's that Freemason Lodge, the Shriner Temple, the Scottish Rite, it's all right there. And they have the Children Masonic Learning Center, which is kind of creepy as well. But they got one of the guys there. I was talking to him, and he said, "Hey man, you want to see your uncle's picture?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." He's like, "Well, you got your uncle's picture here in the lodge. Come in here and check it out." So I went inside there and I looked at it, and they're like, you should join. This is something, this and that. So I was like, well, yeah, maybe I should. So I went home and I was looking at the information, and the guy contacted me. He's like, "We got a meeting set up for you. You can come here and you can, we can do this." So they're gonna check you out and stuff like that. And when I was pretty excited about doing it. Then all of a sudden I got this horrible feeling. I got this like just completely, I don't know how to explain it other than I felt like somebody just punched me in the stomach really hard. Just a really horrible feeling. And so I started praying about it, and I started thinking about it, and I went online and I started researching it. And you're one of the first videos that I came across, believe it or not. And this was, nearly, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago after I became a believer. And so I started hearing what you had to say about it. I was hearing other people, what they were saying about it. And I was so thankful that God put that horrible feeling inside of me. Otherwise, I probably never would have researched it, because to me, Freemasonry was nothing at that point, because my uncle was one. He was also a Baptist minister, all these different things. So like, I didn't think anything negative about it at that point. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just, people need to really research what they're getting themselves into, because I'm so glad that God put that bad feeling inside of me, because I never would have researched it to begin with. So, if you're listening to this, there's no such thing as coincidence in the Hebrew language. Everything that you do, right now, you're listening to this for a reason. And so I know that there's somebody listening right now that is interested in the Freemasonry. And listen to Bill. He's been through it. I'm thankful for him to come on for sure. I know we could, I want to, I guess, go, unless you have something more you wanted to say about Freemasonry. I guess the original reason I wanted to have you on was to talk about a little bit about vampirism, because it's really popular right now.
Yeah.
And I know that.
Let me just say one other thing, if I might interrupt, about the Masons, and that is, sure. I think it's a wonderful testimony what you shared, but I would just challenge if there are any people that are supposedly Bible-believing Christians listening to this show tonight, I would challenge them as to why don't they feel that voice that you're talking about, that impulse within themselves that says this isn't right. Where is their spiritual discernment? Because I'll tell you a true story. When I first got born again in 1984, about a week or 10 days later, I went to a Masonic Lodge meeting. It was a noon luncheon. It was called a High 12 luncheon. And I went into that building, had the Holy Spirit for the first time in my life. And I felt so awful walking into that building. I felt so oppressed, I couldn't wait to leave. And my question to you, Christian Freemason out there, if you're listening, is why don't you feel that conviction? Have you seared your conscience over the years because you think, oh, my dad was in it, my uncle was in it, you know, my pastor's in it? Well, none of those people are going to have to account for your sin. Only you are responsible for your sin. And you need to repent, renounce the lodge, send a letter, demit to the lodge, and get out of it. And on our website, withOneAccord.org, we have a sample letter that people can send to their Grand Lodge, whatever state, like you're in Indiana, they might be in, and get out of it. Because otherwise the devil will have all the right he ever wants to chew on in your family.
And only through the power of Yeshua will you be free from all this stuff. It's important that we use his name, and it's important that we bind things in his name. And I know that that's the only way you guys are going to be free. So exactly what Bill said, if you're not feeling it, you need to examine yourself as portrayed in 1 John. Look at that. How to examine yourself. How do you know if you're in the Messiah? If you follow his commandments, you're in the Messiah. If you're not, you're a liar. It's pretty simple. And so if you're not doing those things, then you're not in the Messiah. And if you're not feeling those things.
All right. I can't condone Christianity in any way, shape, or form myself. But Bill had experiences that I think are pretty helpful as far as being enlightening goes. Another subject we don't talk about, you know, much is going into detail on Freemasonry, when we have so many people that point out that much of the temple ritual and the endowment comes from Freemasonry. They fail to point out that the god of Masonry is declared to be, by their own leaders, Lucifer. And Joseph Smith was a Freemason and had just joined a few weeks before and received the first 3 degrees previous to changing the endowment. Says Albert Pike, who was supreme commander, etc., of the southern jurisdiction and of all North America, that which we say to the crowd is we worship a God, but is that God the one that one adores without superstition? To you, sovereign grand inspectors general, we say this. That means 33rd degree Freemasons in the Scottish Rite. He says, we say this, you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degree. The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, meaning God of the Old Testament, whose deeds prove his cruelty, perfidy, and hatred of man, I'm not arguing with that, barbarism and repulsion for science, would Adonai and his priests calumniate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black. You can recognize this Luciferian doctrine being taught in the endowment. where Satan tells us that we must know evil to know good, we must know pain to appreciate pleasure, etc. And in the Book of Mormon, where it states that there is opposition in all things. For the absolute can only exist as two gods, darkness being necessary to the statue and the brake to the locomotive. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy. And the true and pure philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. Adonai means my Lord in Hebrew. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, also known as Jehovah in Mormonism, the God of darkness and evil. So Joseph Smith confused things for the Latter-day Saints in that endowment, and Brigham Young and his successors, when they make Lucifer out to be the same individual as Satan, as the Christians teach. That's not the belief that's taught to the Freemasons, and Joseph Smith got so much of the ritual from Freemasonry, in which you are forsworn, as you're commanded not to do in Matthew and James, as Bill was mentioning there. The thing they do in courts too. Lay your hand on the Bible and swear. The Bible tells you not to swear. Thus, just more in our society, evidencing the hypocrisy and the contradiction. And you raising your arm to the Masonic square when you're doing that, and putting your left hand out on the Bible, similar to holding it out in front of you while holding your right arm to the square, or reversing that, as we see in the Baphomet pose and in one of the LDS tokens or signs. And as we see George Washington doing in that picture of him at the Capitol, on the roof, the ceiling of the Capitol building, if you know what Baphomet is. And I wanted to take a moment to look at some clips here of people who've also been involved in the satanic rituals, and some of that's a bit graphic. Okay, here we're going to get some testimony regarding what goes on in some of these satanic ritualistic sessions here. This is going to be a bit graphic. It's going to be extremely graphic, and this is the type of thing that Bishop Pace was telling us about. But this is a victim who's actually going to be talking about her experience. She's not LDS as far as I know, but this Satanism permeates not only the LDS Church, but society at large, and is very involved through organizations where they are able to victimize people in the churches that they control, such as the LDS Church, Catholic, JW, Scientology, etc.
Presiding over things. When they dragged onto stage, they dragged a heavily pregnant woman onto stage here, and she was screaming her head off because she wasn't drugged and she wasn't unethically hypnotized. And I remember sitting over there thinking, oh my God, she's not drugged, she's not hypnotized, and it was horrendous. So there's adrenaline going through her system and adrenaline going through her body, and she's heavily pregnant and naked, and she had a brown bowler haircut, and she's one of what they call a breeder, and she's used just for breeding for these rituals and for child sex trafficking. And
so let me say here, I met a young couple through our midwife when I was about to become a father. And this young couple, the girl had grown up in California and had entered into witchcraft through, a step-by-step process, starting with love spells and so forth, and got into animal sacrifice, and then in the orgies and the sacrifice of children that were born or basically taken out cesarean in a sacrifice in the temple of Satan. And her story, what she said, was very similar to what this gal said when she mentioned things that just sickened her to the point where she left witchcraft and Satanism and was baptized LDS. All right, let's continue here. She's mentioning the adrenaline. That's because adrenochrome is used by the elite, and it is very addictive. And when Bill was talking about vampirism, he was just scratching the surface on that. It is something that we are led to believe is make-believe, but in Satanism, it's a very physical part of what the elite are involved with, for the benefits that they feel that they gain health-wise. You can believe that.
Drag her onto the stage, and they lay her down, and the head for a sacrifice is always here, so they're laying the feet's that end, and where she's screaming, right, Beasley's over here, and he goes to us, I'll never forget this, he goes, she's screaming and making fuss, and he goes, oh, he says, you know, he's back like this, and he comes forward and he goes, excuse us for a minute, and everyone laughs. Everyone thinks that's hilarious, except for me. And then they've got, because they had two big security guards dragging her onto stage, and they needed extra help, so it was like usually the thug type who likes to hurt people. And the cop, he used what he knows about holding people down, and the four of them pin her down. And they're holding her legs and her arms and whatever, shoulders. And then Benno has a ceremonial dagger, and he's like, it's further back. It's a shame this is here because he's further back, and he does his usual crap. You know, they worship their gods, you know, Baal, Lucifer, hail Satan, son of the morning, and all the other gods and goddesses, you know. And then he has this knife, and he slams it after he's done all his ritualistic sort of chanting and words and whatever, and people are chanting or whatever, and he slams this dagger, ceremonial dagger, two hands, into the woman's, I don't know, around about here where the bone ends, and he can get in, and he tears her open with the knife right down to the pelvic bone, and blood just pisses out everywhere. It's like a waterfall and just everything. And then they pull the baby out, and then there are people assisting, and they've got a gold platter, and they've got a chalice, and they collect the blood of the baby. They drain the baby's blood in the chalice, and then they chop the baby up and put it on the gold platter, and then they pass it around for Holy Communion. So it's the black mass, the real typical old-fashioned black mass that the Catholic mass is based on, right? The Catholic mass the Latin mass is a sanitized version of this. There's nothing Christian about Catholic Mass. And so that's all going on. And then the next thing I remember is they lined up, this stage was lined with children who must have been about, they looked about maybe 8, 9, 10 years of age, that sort of thing. And they had them lined up like this on the stage. They went like this. They lined the children up. And the children were hypnotised. And the children came forward and they were like this. They were just like this. They just, you know, as they were told, they did nothing and they just stared straight ahead. And they're very attractive children. And then had a samurai sword. It was incredibly sharp. And he's crap. He doesn't have any style about him, but the basic thing is he goes along each child and he has a certain stance about him. Is it that way? Or is it that way? And he slices off the heads of each child. I don't know if he turns or I can't remember what he does, but then he, you know, goes along and, you know, like this, and he goes along and chops off each head. And each kid falls, the body just falls, and blood is going everywhere. I mean, if you DNA tested this area, there would have to be remains of someone's blood and DNA in here. There'd have to be somewhere. Yeah. Anyway, then they break out into a bloodied orgy. Now, these people, the whole point behind doing the having the woman not drugged and not hypnotised is to pump as much adrenaline through her blood as possible, because these people are addicted to
adrenochrome.
To adrenaline, and when they drink the blood, you know, it's, you know, the baby's blood. You know, the baby's in distress, so it passes on somehow to the kid, and that's why they, you know, have this sort of situation going on. And they collected some other blood from her or something, you know, on the way. But at the end, I was over here, and a bloody orgy broke out, and everyone started having sex. They're sexually aroused by this stuff. You've got to understand that they are sexually aroused by this crap. And
ever wonder how the term bloody this and bloody that comes up in British culture? I think this girl's from Australia. Brits sent their prisoners after 1776 Declaration of Independence. They couldn't send them to Georgia any longer. But I'm just asking that. A bloody orgy. I don't think that was just a figure of speech here.
I go down. By now, I was over there, but they kind of clear the floor, and I don't know, everyone's just having sex with people, and Kim Beasley Sr. was down here, and I was there, and he came down, and he picked up a head of one of the kids that had dark hair, and I'm standing here. So the table's in the way, but I'm here, and Beasley picks up this head and he shoves it in my face like this, and there's this decapitated head in my face, and he says, "Take ye, eat." And he made me take a bite out of the face. And then everyone just had an orgy. It was just disgusting. And the most vile thing you've ever seen in your life. And that's Bathurst City Hall.
As I said, and as I say in my Cult Mind Control webpage, we've been conditioned by media to think that these things are make-believe. However, victim after victim is consistent in the types of experiences that that they have, which are beyond belief to most of us. However, that doesn't make it not be the truth. And when Bishop Pace was discussing this matter, once again, I'll remind us that he said 75% of those victims that he interviewed had participated in, by being forced to witness and or participate in human sacrifice. And what that woman was describing was, typical of the human sacrifice that occurs. Human sacrifice, which Christy Allen said she witnessed LDS prophets perform underneath the Salt Lake Temple. This is a different interview here, and it's going to bear some similarity to the last. It will discuss satanic ritual, sacrifice, abuse, and using MK Ultra techniques in MK Ultra projects by our satanically led, privately owned CIA. Filled with Mormons, Satanist Mormons in some cases.
Our guest has lived through the most horrendous events imaginable, and to be honest, I still cannot imagine it even after she has told me about some of them. Our guest tonight was born into an Illuminati bloodline family in 1961. Her parents hailed from 2 of the 13 different bloodlines, but her father's bloodline family, Die Familia, who had immigrated from Germany to America, was the family that controlled her young life. She was subjected to satanic ritual abuse by her paternal grandparents.
I might mention here that LDS church presidents and U.S. presidents and other leaders that we find in society tend to come from certain bloodlines. And the LDS Church has done quite a job in genealogical research, which coupled with Ancestry.com and the NSA, close to the church archives there in the Salt Lake Valley, just by coincidence, of course, lend a lot of ability to follow people's lineage, which is incredibly important to these leading bloodlines. And that's why you see, the relations amazingly consistent between church leadership and political leadership when you follow the DNA, which the church has been pleased to present to some of the U.S. presidents. Brigham Young, known to be from at least 2 of these satanic bloodlines, if not more. An agent of the Rothschild banking dynasty, and definitely a Satanist, who ordered the deaths of many people through his Danite bands, not to mention gifting flour laced with glass, ground glass, to the American Indians they called Lamanites, of which Brigham bragged he could kill more Indians with a barrel of flour than a keg of gunpowder.
Her father from birth. The Illuminati's trauma-based mind control programming began, as is standard in all Illuminati families, at the tender age of 2 years old. Her mother was non-compliant and also underwent the same mind control techniques, as did her 2 siblings. Cheryl and her older sister were also placed into the MK Ultra Monarch program in 1965, as her paternal step-grandfather was OSS, as it morphed into the CIA, was her father's handler, and had him sign the 2 girls up for the program. Details of some of their horroring ordeals under the MK Ultra were documented in the book Secret Weapons, Two Sisters' Terrifying True Story of Sex, Spies, and Sabotage by Cheryl and Lynn Hersha, with Dave Griffiths, PhD, and Ted Schwartz. Never intended to remember, around 1996. The sisters began remembering things they were never intended to remember around 1996. Cheryl is now fully integrated and healed from the psychological, emotional, and spiritual wounds from her first traumatic 18 years of life.
When I mentioned Christy Allen, once again, she testified of being involved in the MK Ultra program, signed up by her father. Many of these kids had fathers in military intelligence, as she did, and as a prominent LDS truth and justice warrior who was abused has told me about her father, something I didn't notice her mentioning in other interviews. Now, these memories begin to surface, as the scout said, later in life. They don't always surface. A lot of victims never even realize what happened and never come forward. But Christy mentioned being programmed as a sex slave in the George Romney mansion in Michigan, Mitt Romney's father, who various people have also mentioned as being a major part of trauma-based mind control to provide sex slaves for leading politicians like George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and on. Robert Byrd, and Gerald Ford, to name some that have been specifically mentioned by MK Ultra survivors.
However, the physical damage has left her permanently disabled and 5 years past her prognosis with a rare neurological disorder. Cheryl is a born-again Christian, was married for 28 years, is the mother of 4 adult children, and is now forcibly retired as a disabled RN who lives in the Southwest with her beloved dog. Cheryl was active in the survivor communities of both MK Ultra and satanic ritual abuse until her health plummeted. She has written under her pen name, C.A. Beck, for decades. Cheryl has been compelled to speak out once again for the innocent ones who cannot speak since WikiLeaks broke the Pedogate story, the same life she lived in the 1960s and 70s when trafficked by both her family and the CIA. Due to security-sensitive careers some of her children have, she regrets that she cannot show her face for interviews as requested by their employees. And it should say recording on your side. Oh, hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl. Good to have you here.
Thank you very
Hello,
much.
Angie and Jim. Hello, happy to be here.
Yeah. So we pre-recorded your bio and your intro, and that's quite a story. I had to do a paragraph in the beginning warning people of the sensitive subject matter. So I know that a lot of the information was already in your book. So I think the information we're going to touch on here is more of the SRA, satanic ritual abuse, and that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Cheryl, can you give us a background of your childhood and your family and all that kind of deal?
Yeah, well, it turns out I was born in 1961 to 2 different Illuminati bloodlines. There's 13. I haven't quite pegged my mom's yet. They weren't active participants per se in Illuminati activities. She was raised in a spiritism type home where her mom was really into that kind of stuff. She wasn't raised in a Christian home by any means. So, and then my father's line is different from hers. The only reason I can think, as an Aryan white supremacist type of person, that he married my mom with brown hair and brown eyes was because in her family line is a gypsy bloodline. And in my studies, I have found out that true gypsies in Eastern Europe, specifically the Romanian and Hungarian lines, are the O negative blood type that you hear a lot about, associated, as they say, with Nephilim bloodlines, to be O negative. That's the only reason I can think that he married somebody who he put down the rest of his life. His particular bloodline believed that psychic abilities were passed down in the living blood of a person. Therefore, all the generations of psychic abilities, if you ingested the blood, you got that, acquired powers. So that's the only reason I could think of, that he would actually marry somebody that didn't have the Aryan, blonde. He had actually dark brown to black hair, but he had the blue eyes of the chosen. So he specifically chose my name and dictated it to my mom. And when I was born, she deleted one letter of my name, which changed my entire destiny, because they determined your destiny, of course, according to numerology and astrology. So when she dropped one letter of my name, she changed my entire destiny. So therefore, I was ruled an expendable, which means if I lived or died, it did not matter to the family. I had no inherent worth at that point. My siblings, one was of chosen, my other sibling was an oracle. So they had special worth to the family. I was expendable.
Oh, wow. So did your mom know what she was doing? Did she do that on purpose?
No, she did it by a suggestion of a nurse that people could pronounce the middle name two different ways. So she didn't want it pronounced, it basically was an E on the end of my middle name, and they could pronounce it with that E sound, and then she thought it sounded stupid, so she dropped the E.
Nice. So are all 13 of the families, are they inherently the same as far as having oracles and that kind of deal?
My only, I can only say by my experience with my fathers, they had, a determining oracle, a head oracle, and she was the one that, we had to go through, and she, made the ultimate decision about my life. There was a family gathering in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the UP, when I was 4. And I had to go and stand before this oracle over the whole De Familia, basically. And she determined my future, and that was expendable. Wow. So what?
That's the same area that Bill Schneblin, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, said that he was one of the most powerful wizards, magicians in Satanism, right up there in the Michigan Peninsula. Just like Miguel mentioned being up there in Boston, where these covens were, or actually that was Bill, and that was the same place that there was such a proliferation in the Catholic diocese of pedophilia. Just kind of little coincidences I'm noticing with the various people speaking of their experiences in Satanism.
4 years old, they decided that they would use me as a child sex slave in the child trafficking, and prepared me for that.
And what do you mean they prepared you for it?
Well, they did a ritual, and this is going to be graphic. They did a ritual where the high priest, who was also my pediatrician under Project Paperclip, he was brought over. So he was a Nazi. He was also a high priest of the circle, and during the ritual, they put a white cloth under me, laid me on an altar, and he was dressed like the Pope almost, and he had the long staff with the pointy end, and I was pierced vaginally, and of course that made me bleed, and they collected the blood on this white cloth. You hear a lot in child trafficking about the handkerchiefs, right? So these are prized possessions as far as taking the virginity, sacrificing the virginity of a child. And so once they did that, then they had their usual orgy celebration, parading that white cloth with the blood around. And then I was taken to the side by the pediatrician, and actually he took a scalpel and opened up the back wall of my vagina to stretch it. So they systematically stretched me. One of the ways they did that was to sit me on a Baphomet statue that was life-size. And that was kept in a barn at a remote ranch that there was a lot of rituals done there inside the barn. It was huge. It was actually a kiddie attraction on the weekends for children to come to, but they did rituals there, they did kiddie porn there, bestiality, so on and so forth, because it was very isolated. But I was literally sat on the penis of this Baphomet statue, strapped to it, and left there over the weekend by myself, in the dark, no food, no water. So that was how they prepared me for child trafficking to accommodate men.
Wow. And that was when you were 4 years old.
4 years old is the prime age to start child trafficking.
Right. And do you remember all of this vividly?
Now I do, yes. And the damage is well documented. I had to have a hysterectomy when I was 33, and I had told my GYN about my life. She knew about it, and all the evidence was there. All the evidence is in my GI system. I had evidence of years and years of STD, pelvic inflammatory disease throughout my whole pelvic cavity. My colon had been ripped from the pelvic walls in 3 different places with the sodomy and the brutality of, what they did. And I have a whole extra loop of colon that they call floppy colon. When they shoot SMN kiddie porn, their way of doing, and again this is graphic, of doing an enema to make it a clean shot was to take a garden hose with a sprayer end nozzle and clean you out before they did the shoot. So that high of a pressure created that extra loop of colon. Wow. And that's, well documented.
This is just really insane, and I want to tell everybody in the audience that we're doing this because we want everybody to know that this is still happening.
Yes.
Yes, it's still happening. Yes.
And it's so all of the child trafficking that's going on right now does it all go back to the Illuminati family?
It all goes back. This has been in Washington, D.C. since the end of World War II. So when there was a senator that said, well, we've had the New World Order in D.C. for 70 years. They have. This hasn't been embedded in D.C. since the end of World War II when they brought over the Nazis. And what happened was the CIA, through Project Often, OFTEN, joined up with the Illuminati families and had members join in the CIA to learn the trauma-based mind control from the multi-generational Illuminati families, because all kids born into that go through the trauma-based mind control to produce alters starting at the age of 2. And so they learn the techniques from the Illuminati families. So you can say that the CIA's roots are entangled, you know, with the Illuminati family. The CIA is Illuminati, Illuminati is CIA.
Now we remember Bishop Pace said in his report that this satanic ritual abuse was systematic for intentionally creating alters or alternative personalities and fracturing personalities, scientifically doing this. So that's going along exactly with what this woman is saying. And Bishop Pace believed it was part of a secret combination which the scriptures discuss. He just didn't use the name Illuminati.
Not all people, you know, there's good people in the CIA, but as we've seen in this past year, especially the deep state that everybody talks about is Illuminati.
And so they're all from one of these 13 bloodlines. Wow. And I want...
There at least, there are some in it that are true believers. There are some in it that are pedophiles. There are some in it because they've been blackmailed and, you know, compromised. In fact, that was one of my alter personalities that they formed. My job was to compromise people they had slipped drugs in their drinks in the government to blackmail them with pictures of them with a child.
Right. Wow. Now, you said that their goal is to create alters or alternate personalities. Why do they do that?
Because you don't remember, number one, you don't remember what happened to you. They can totally control you. For rituals, they create a doll altar. Is the first altar that I was subjected to. I had a doll named Thumbelina, and I was 2 years old. So for the first trauma, again, this is graphic, I was put on an altar with my arms tied out to the sides, and the pediatrician, that was the high priest, chopped off the end of my left thumb. So it related into my doll Thumbelina, the thumb. And through that trauma, they created the doll altar that would be present for rituals, who would not speak, who would not see, who would not hear, who would not basically remember what happened the night before in a ritual. And then they put the end of my thumb in a jar with formaldehyde to hold it in front of me and remind me from time to time that other digits would join that jar if I ever spoke. So, and it is typical for girls that they choose their favorite doll, and that's the first altar that they create. So they can pull that out for a ritual, because in satanic rituals, if you break that circle with noise or kids moving around or anything like that, you're going to get retaliated at by the demons that they conjure. So it cannot, the circle cannot be broken with a disruptive child.
That reminds me of the histories of Joseph Smith in the treasure-seeking business, and how he would say that, oh, you know, somebody screwed up. They broke the circle. They caused a problem, a disruption, and that's why the demon moved the treasure, you know, beyond our reach and so forth. So then sacrifice, an animal, black sheep, black goat, black dog, slit its throat, march it around the, edge of the circle that he'd drawn with the magic knife, and try to appease these demons. The church has tried to bury that, but there are journals of people who witness this sort of thing, and that's a type of thing that you can see in various journals, or in I believe some of that will be found in the book Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview by Professor D. Michael Quinn, who was one of the highest ranked, I don't know if you can call it ranked, he was a highly revered professor at Brigham Young University. He had access to special, areas and vaults of, where LDS memorabilia, things are hidden from the public, and the church excommunicated him for telling the truth about things that don't look real good to an audience that is becoming increasingly Christian in a lot of the language used to promote the LDS Church, and Christians don't take. They are not aware that they are founded also in the theology coming from the mystery religion. So they had to hide this stuff. And breaking the circle, that was a problem for Joseph Smith, and not coming up, not following with exactness, as it says in Helaman, the commandments, except for these were commandments of demons.
They picked doll altars.
So are there actual demons that are conjured during these ceremonies?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
I've seen quite a bit. Quite a bit in my life. Yes.
That must have been a really scary experience, I would think.
Yes, but fortunately, at the same time when they began at 2 with the ritual abuse, my father took us to church. All good Illuminati families go to church, sing in the choir, or on the evangelism committee, are fine, upstanding members of the community. And the church that we were taken to when I was 2 was basically just a front for the family. I mean, the whole elder board that was in control of the church was the family. And I heard about Jesus for the first time at 2 years old, and I was sprinkle baptized, and I fully believed at 2 that Jesus was my Savior. Somebody loved me enough to die for me and live for me, and I grasped onto that, and I never let go. So, as time progressed and I grew in the Lord at the same time, being subjected to satanic ritual abuse, I grew stronger and stronger in my spirit. And people have to understand, people say, well, you can't do that at 2 years old. The other thing I need to say about me was I was born with a Mensa level IQ. So I was born, quote unquote, a genius. I was walking, talking in full sentences, etc. at the age of 9 months. So at 2 years old, I fully comprehended what they were saying to me. And I loved Sunday school. And then they have you go to church so they can twist God. So I had Sunday school in the morning on Sundays, and then Sunday afternoons or evenings, we were taken out and tortured and abused for what we had learned that morning about Jesus. So wow. I can tell you, yeah. So they can.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to ask you. So you were going to Christian church, right? And so was the family also attending?
Oh yeah.
And then at night, or I don't know if it was the same day, but you're saying at night they had another life. They were worshiping Satan, or they were Luciferian.
Yeah, they did. Right. They had a basement level of the church, of course, where they would do rituals and other things. However, we were taken out to a different city for this, what we used to call our favorite windy road drive, where my father would take us out.
I want to pause there, draw some more parallels. Another LDS gal, this gal's not LDS apparently, the gal that I've spoken to, who's LDS, whose father was military intelligence, was telling me about being underneath, being dropped off by her parents to a location where they would be in a basement level, as is done in Satanism so very often, just like Ben Franklin and the Hellfire Club. I mean, they're always doing stuff underneath these buildings, or the molestation underneath the MTC by the mission president. So this gal was talking to me about being dropped off as a little primary child, and they'd taken all their clothes taken from them, and being dressed in these little white, she say they were kind of almost see-through dresses, and marching around and doing some things that I don't think she fully remembered everything that went on, but this sounds like satanic stuff, and it was being done by their primary teachers and things like that. Just like Christy Allen talks about people that she knew from church, from the Relief Society, and other leaders for the girls, preparing her to be molested by priesthood men that she knew from the church, in satanic rituals that were done actually at the church, she said. And she was involved in the MK Ultra and things at a certain Air Force base, the same Air Force base where Satanists would come to my sister-in-law's home when she was a child and participate in seances with her stepdad, who, yes, sexually molested her, my sister-in-law. And what she told me was that she noticed 3 little dots kind of making a little equilateral triangle between the in the area between the thumb and index finger on these men. She noticed that as a little child, and she mentioned horrific experiences of demons that were conjured in these seances.
And it seemed like it was a long distance away, but it actually wasn't. But there was a windy road, and he loved to drive really fast and like a maniac and scare us. So somehow, though it scared us, we looked forward to being taken out to this other city and then coming back at sunset via the windy road. However, there was a lot of time that passed because we would go after lunch and not get back till sunset to our city, and they were right beside each other. And so there was a lot I found out. When I started remembering, I knew I was crazy. When I started remembering, I thought, you're crazy, you're just like your father, you might as well kill yourself. That's the suicide programming that they put inside of you.
Remember Glenn Pace mentioned suicide programming? Basically, it's, this person will self-destruct if it begins to reveal information that is sensitive to the satanic network. And then, of course, we wonder why we've got so many suicides among teenagers in Utah. And part of that's obviously part of the religious indoctrination of zero self-worth if you have violated LDS chastity code, whether it be for LGBTQ kids or heterosexual kids or whatever it is, or those who have been involved with satanic ritual abuse. Now, my wife grew up in Salt Lake City, and her parents were not active, but they were members of the church, and she was molested, and she said she only thinks she knows of one friend she ever knew who was not molested, being molested at home, generally by fathers. And if they're in CES, you can be damn sure the church is going to cover for them, just like the Catholics do for their pedophile priests. And just like Christy Johnson said, the church covered for her CES employed father.
I went back to California, and I went back and I found out that it was a 10-minute drive. So where did all these hours go? Well, those were...
Isn't it interesting how so much of this has to do with California? Christy Johnson got sent out to California. Dad was in the CES. Paul H. Dunn was California. Christy Allen's California. Me, California. Sister-in-law, California. The drug trafficking going through the Air Force Base, California. Involvement of police, where constantly you're having kids declared as committing suicide, but everybody knew is when they knew too much of the police involvement and the military involvement in the drug stuff. In fact, I remember as a kid when one of my friends wanted to buy a quantity of marijuana, going to an an airman who was a drug dealer, and the boyfriend of another friend's sister who lived with him. And I happened to be present at this, and the fellow said, "Listen, I don't have any marijuana at this time, at this moment. However, 800 pounds is coming in tonight from Denver in the wing of an aircraft to the Air Force Base. I'll have all you need by dawn." And he did, believe me.
Hours that they were twisting your beliefs in God.
And all those guys that were going to the seances at my sister-in-law's house, meeting with her stepdad, were high-ranking Air Force guys with the insignia of the 3 dots.
So while you're being tortured, or little animals being tortured, etc., and they're asking you to deny Christ, and they have you scream out for Jesus. Jesus, help me. Jesus, come rescue us. And they prove to you that Jesus doesn't care about you. You're a dirty, nasty, rotten little kid.
Exactly what Bishop Pace said he was hearing time after time from the SRA victims there in Utah, Salt Lake area.
Jesus is not going to come and rescue you, and he's weak. I just never believed him. I always held on to Jesus. And I credit that to the grace of God and God alone. I don't know why I had that in.
Okay. It's about enough about what we need to hear from this gal. I obviously have a different perspective of how Jesus works when you need him to hold your family together. But she's corroborating what Glenn Pace said, and time after time we're hearing the same theme. And I just think it's helpful to get into some of the detail of how real and how sick this governing group of elitists are, and that it's not like you've been told on the Disney Channel and on the news, where they want to use terms like conspiracy theorist to discredit, because that's part of the mass mind control that occurs through the media in constantly conditioning us that things are not the way that these people are telling us it is. They don't want you to look, because if you look carefully enough, the evidence is there. the church does its best to compartmentalize and control the discussions of this sort of thing to make it look as though it is not an institutional problem, that there is no secret society activity, no secret combination governing the church, that these are, like they say on Fox News and CNN, just conspiracy theorists. However, the rhetoric from the church has changed much from the days of Ezra Taft Benson to what it is now. And controlling the argument and keeping it within certain bounds is what's done in LDS apologetics regarding anything from what they call polygamy and avoiding the spiritual wife discussion. Hey, George. To Freemasonry and the true connection, an ongoing connection of Freemasonry and Satanism and the LDS Church. To the cover-up of their pedophilia, because pedophilia is at the heart of Satanism, and Satanism is at the heart and governing the LDS Church, which thing you don't hear the other people talking about, because somehow they stay within the bounds that the Dark Lord has set on the conversation of these topics that are sensitive. That's why I get kicked off of various subreddits, basically by the fact that they're controlled by people that seem to be protecting Freemasonry. It is usually the Freemasons that attack me on the various Reddits, whether it's ex-Mormon Reddit, Mormon Reddit, LDS, Latter-day Saints, Mormon politics. I've been kicked off all of those because they all demand being echo chambers for a certain point of view, and all of those are politically correct to a certain venue. None of them will tolerate exposing Freemasonry and Satanism as it actually exists and controls all of these religious bodies and political bodies. All of these privately owned corporations whose structures allow the type of corporate governance that I've illustrated in some of the videos I've done, that is very well illustrated in the video called The Corporation Nation by Clint Richardson. It's a 3-hour and 13-minute video. I've incorporated some of it in some of my videos because it shows the physical proof of the private ownership of our cities, states, counties, and the countries. Our institutions, banking, and organizations that we call federal agencies such as the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, the military, all is commerce. And that's something Madeline and I discussed regarding the maritime law and so forth. And when we look at the way things are actually structured financially under the Bank of International Settlements, which is actually above the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, we find a structure that is one that is hidden from most people, where we see the major commercial banks down here, some of them, just some of them. We see the U.S. Fed, Bank of England, Reserve Bank of Australia. They're only branches of a larger system. They're underneath the IMF and the World Bank, which is underneath the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland. And most people have no idea that it's actually a world system, that the United States company or plantation is actually not autonomous. And there are various structural, pyramid-shaped structures that illustrate control that is exercised through secret societies where the governing members of boards of directors over huge corporations, including churches, are controlled through shareholder votes, where block voting occurs, and the heads of organizations just tend to be somehow members of these secret societies where Satanism is part and parcel of their religion, of their occult religion, Luciferian religion, and Satanism, which are actually not completely the same. We have massive numbers of NGOs, non-government organizations, where unelected people actually do so much to control policy in nations. And we have people like Henry Kissinger at the top of the list there with the most connections to various NGOs. And down the list, about number 10, we have Brent Scowcroft, an LDS 70, I believe. He's a 70s general authority who helped found the NSA and is also business partners with Henry Kissinger. All these people are occultists. You may recognize some of the names on there. This particular website has cataloged the various organizations that you see these folks participating in, whether they be secretive societies, brotherhoods, you know, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, P2 Freemasonry, the Rosicrucians, on and on the list goes. And, you know, MSOM, you know, Military Sovereign Order of Malta. You find that our leaders, politically and in business and in banking and so forth, are members of these societies. You find that they have high levels of purity in various bloodlines. Here we've got 13 bloodlines detailed by Fritz Springmeier. And when you do the genealogical research, it's incredible who runs what and who's got all the power in various areas where monopolies are given in business, and everything is a business, whether it's a church or not. Religion is a business. I think we briefly mentioned, you know, the Luciferian nature of Freemasonry, which the church apologists and even the anti-church, anti-Mormonism, anti-Mormon YouTubers are mostly avoiding discussing. They stay within the bounds that the Lord has set, essentially. In other words, you must control the conversation in order to avoid certain topics and certain information from surfacing. And in the church, discussions regarding the church's relationship with Freemasonry, you don't hear much about the true Luciferian nature of Freemasonry. And reading in Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, you know, it's replete with that type of information. And as we can see, the apologists for Freemasonry try to disassociate Albert Pike with anything but Scottish Rite, and that's just not valid. And if you read, you can see that his redoing of the rituals and so forth, and also the writing of Morals and Dogma of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry were completely different. And he also had many degrees of the York Rite. So he was extremely authoritative, and his declarations on the godhood and goodness of Lucifer are very clear, as the book is filled with magic, astrology, and science, which actually comes out of magic. And that's why you find that whether it be Isaac Newton or Leonardo da Vinci or Kant, Hegel, Darwin, Swedenborg. All of these people are occultists, and most belong to secretive or secret orders, the same as the American founders, whose occultic and oftentimes satanic orientation is well masked, and they're even promoted as being something quite different from that. But when we look at it, we see Satanists like Benjamin Franklin, who are lauded by the LDS as like the Benjamin Franklin Academy, of which I was a part as an administrator, actually. No, they give you a very sanitized version that goes along just perfectly with the doctrine of manifest destiny, upon which Mormonism and the Book of Mormon are built, telling us that the God of Israel arranged for the freedom of religion and liberty in the United States so that the gospel could be restored, and nothing could be further from the truth when you study the true occult origins of Mormonism. Now I want to get into taking a look at a few minutes of some other video that I've created. This is from Book of Mormon Warnings of Secret Combinations, Illuminated Freemasonry, the CFR, and Donald Trump today.
Luciferianism is, and continues to be, the ruling class religion since the time of the ancient mystery and fertility religions. And Lucifer is exalted. These mystery religions have continued today in Freemasonry, Skull and Bones, and through also the Jesuits and the Catholic Church. But it is also in almost every aspect of society. So much so that someone sold into the spiritual blindness offered by the Luciferian philosophy in its many forms will not even notice this happening. On the subject of Luciferianism, Philip D. Collins states the following: Luciferianism is the product of religious engineering, which sociologist William Sims Bainbridge defines as the conscious, systematic, skilled creation of a new religion. In actuality, this is a tradition that even precedes Bainbridge. It has been the practice of Freemasonry for years. It was also the practice of Masonry's religious and philosophical progenitors, the ancient pagan mystery cults. The inner doctrines of the Mesopotamian secret societies provided the theological foundations for the Christian and Judaic heresies, Kabbalism.
We also have Donald Trump coming out and saying that he really respects and he gets his advice from Richard Haas. Now, who is Richard Haas? Richard Haas is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. He is a well-known Bilderberg member. He has served George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush when they were in power. And according to Richard Haas's spokesperson, Richard Haas briefed Trump on foreign policy in August of 2015. And now Trump is saying on national television that he really respects Richard Haas, that he gets his advice from this man who is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, which many people say is the nation's most influential foreign policy think tank group in the United States. This is what Dick Cheney had to say about this quasi-secret society.
So on Foreign Relations, as you mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
Obviously keeping it secret that he was a large proponent of the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations was actually started in 1921 by Warburg, by J.P. Morgan, by Rockefeller as a front group to get more power and control to establish a new world order.
The very fact that he worships and respects Richard Haas, the very fact that he considers a war criminal like John Bolton a part of his national security team, is extremely worrisome to say the least, because all these men are interconnected with the Bohemian Grove, with the Council on Foreign Relations, with the Bilderberg Group, the establishment behind the scenes that really pulls the strings in this world.
But I look out at this audience filled with not only many friends and colleagues, but people who have served in prior administrations. And so there is never a time when the inbox is not full. Thank you very much, Richard, and I am delighted to be here in these new headquarters. I have been often to, I guess, the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice, and more secure in the quest for peace. 100 generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars raged across the span of human endeavor. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders. Global governance.
Never before has a new world order had to be assembled from so many different perceptions.
A truly global society. Its task will be to develop an overall strategy for America in the period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity, and it's like one moment.
Good evening, everybody. President Obama and British Prime Minister Gordon today calling for a new world order to tackle our global economic crisis.
And the President outlined his vision of a new world order in which the U.S. would participate fully. We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see. So I see a world order in the future is a multi-polar world order. I think the new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation. India will be a central actor in the new world order. And the present window of opportunity during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built will not be here for too long.
George Bush.
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, when soldiers died in wave upon wave for a union based on liberty, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled. And after 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order, and instead it looks like we got a lot of.
Well, we heard what Bill Clinton had to say about the Bohemian Club with Scowcroft, Kissinger, and the boys go to. Now, they mentioned Hillary being a witch, but Bill Clinton used the witchcraft language in his famous speech where he called for the forcing of the spring. Opposing political parties are actually buddies behind the scenes. We've seen that with Bush Sr. and Clinton and various endeavors they've been in. Jimmy Carter, they're all in the Council on Foreign Relations. Here we see Mikhail Gorbachev and then Robert Schuller, and quite certain that it is a show. I'm well aware that members of opposing political parties are actually buddies behind the scenes. We've seen that with Bush Sr. and Clinton and various endeavors they've been in. Jimmy Carter, they're all in the Council on Foreign Relations. Here we see Mikhail Gorbachev and then Robert Schuller, and heads of religion and heads of state behind the scenes have a secret alliance. We've shown these people are into the occult and Satanism. The Luciferian religion is the religion of the elite. So we're tying together Freemasonry, high-level Freemasonry, the occult, the Luciferian religion, which is Freemasonry in the highest degrees, Satanism, and various other secretive orders and semi-secret non-government organizations where it seems our political leaders and religious leaders and bankers and corporate leaders all come together and cooperate in something that's extremely powerful and extremely profitable for these huge corporations, which are actually privately owned, not just the ones we recognize as businesses, but those who we do not recognize normally as businesses that we thought were just publicly owned governments, our cities, states, and pension funds, etc.
So in this particular illustration that someone's made on how they think the world operates, they've got that Council on Foreign Relations right here with its British counterpart here, Royal Institute of International Affairs. These think tanks have an enormous amount of clout in determining foreign policy and so forth. As you could see, Hillary Clinton and Dick Cheney were shown discussing the influence of the council at the council, and not sounding like their fiduciary responsibility to the American people, or at least what it's portrayed to be, was of prime importance to them. Alongside of them, we see the Club of Rome, the Bilderberg Group, UN, the Trilateral Commission. What we see is the heads of these, maybe outside of the UN, tend to be members of the Committee of 300, which a lot of people haven't bothered to study about. I have done some study there and read a book on that a number of years in the past, and it's rather interesting. It was perhaps in that book that I learned about the money laundering of HSBC long before they were busted for that, and of Citibank. The committee, the Council of 13 would be something you'd be referring to when we're talking about the occult hierarchy. Down here we've got organized religion, courts, prisons, military, police, Disney, various ways in which mind control is exercised upon the people. Here we can see a little bit of the consolidation of the huge corporations, or if we look at charts that show us the type of massive power wielded by certain companies, holding companies that own all sorts of companies. And what we find is that basically the interrelation and this interrelated stock investment, cross-investing, it puts a tremendous amount of wealth and power dictated through the shareholder votes of the majority stockholders, the majority shareholders, and majority votes. In other words, a preferred shareholder may get 30 votes, for one share, whereas a common stockholder may get 1. And so you've got companies like Barclays, the Queen likes to throw some money, or UBS here, an enormous Swiss bank there, and all these other, everybody's heard of J.P. Morgan merging with Chase Manhattan, and Goldman Sachs down the line, Morgan Stanley, who runs that consortium that bought out all the parking revenues from Chicago and so forth in a one of these public-private partnerships where or an outright private buyout of something that taxpayer money paid for, but the illusion is that the taxpayer money in these things that are called public really belong to the people, but the truth is that they don't. They're privately owned corporations, and we see that when we look at the comprehensive annual financial reports. Here, here's the beginning of the one for California, and you just look at these investments, and it's just crazy. Now, they just categorize them there. I believe I think it was Florida that actually goes right through them and shows where the millions of shares are held in these various companies, and many of them are transnational corporations. Many of them are foreign based here, but you see, it says that these these are 50 of the 147 super connected companies. What you find out is that like groups like let's say News Corp, okay, which is headed up by the main dominant shareholders there would be the family of Rupert Murdoch, a Bilderberger, and yet so they own Fox News, which portrays itself as conservative, and they control both sides of all arguments and use of the Hegelian dialectic. Company after company here, you find so many companies are owned by other large holding companies, and so whether it's Taco Bell and Burger King, and other fast foods all being owned by a particular, or not all of them, but several be owned by one group and several be owned by another, and the same thing with media companies. That's why you see companies like the LDS Church owning massive amounts of media. In fact, isn't the LDS Church like the largest corporation west of the Mississippi in the United States? Crazy. So take a look at the video that's got those excerpts, or look at Corporation Nation video, or do your own research. I'd suggest using this video and then going ahead and looking at comprehensive annual financial reports yourselves. I've done a little bit of that, and just looking at the investments that never benefit the taxpayers in most of these corporations that we call in the cities and states, counties, and pension funds. Now the pension funds actually do tend to benefit people, and unlike the Social Security Administration, as it's called, which is privately owned also, people get a lot better retirement from CalPERS, especially if you're a cop or a judge, because then your employer matching amount is like 48% instead of 7%. So yeah, things are a lot different from the way they tell us. Here you're looking at HSBC as one of the main banks there, Wells, Goldman, B of A, Chase, Citi. And there are plenty of others, as you can see in that international lineup, UBS, Deutsche Bank, and so forth. But HSBC was brought to my attention along with Citi as huge money launderers of the opium crop. And later on, HSBC basically did have to pay a lot of fines for that. No one went to jail, of course, because they understand that things are just exchanged for value, and when you understand the way law really works and that everything is actually commerce, then criminal court didn't necessarily apply. They're able to just pay the fines, and their corporate execs don't have any problem with their money laundering. I don't even think Citi's been busted for it. And then they named HSBC in Shanghai as being a major spot for that in the book on the Committee of 300, and then Citibank in Dubai. And so when I was talking to my friend whose dad seems to be connected with all sorts of really interesting stuff there, and very suspect when you read about where some of these places are. I asked him where he did his banking, in his banking career to acquire all this money, and he said he was a city banker in Dubai. Also that their foundation used money primarily from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and the Carnegie. One of the Carnegie, I don't know, Carnegie Endowment for the Arts, I think that's what it was. It was a Carnegie Fund for the foundation they used to kind of bring everybody in under the umbrella of society, where they can be influenced by going into some of these countries where people live in the jungle and, bringing them in, do some humanitarian things, get them some stoves and do some nice things for people, but eventually they get brought into society where they are involved in the school systems that the elite want the people programmed through. They also lived in the one of the 2 locations mentioned in a particular book where a lot of trauma-based mind control goes on in terms of programming of people for MK Ultra kind of stuff. They lived there too. Yeah. Too many coincidences with these guys, not to mention the droopy eye and reacting to certain things in ways that look like programming, and then tell me that his daddy owned a particular bank that when we were in, he suddenly got immediate cooperation from a gal who was not cooperating with him on something that he needed, And he looked real confident as she was tapped on the shoulder or phone rang. She disappeared, came back a few minutes later, and was literally shaking, quivering, and saying, whatever it is you wanted, sir, I'll do whatever you want. When we left there, I asked him, what in the world just happened? He said, oh, my dad used to own this bank. He bought it when it wasn't doing too well. He turned it a nice profit, and he knows the president. And I sent him an email off my phone. That was before texting existed. So apparently within a couple of minutes, the president of a national bank was notified of an employee in a particular branch not cooperating with someone on the inside of one of these power groups. And believe me, what happened was eye-opening. So, those guys were good Mormons, by the way, and in leadership. That was one of my eye-opening experiences, that I had seen stuff on the middle management level of Mormonism where people were obviously involved in secretive societies and had extreme amount of power they could exercise through a network. Freemasonry is the network that binds a lot of these people together, that maybe whether they're in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, or a Rosicrucianism, or the Hellfire Club, if that even still exists. I mean, there are so many, the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, the Order of the Garter. You see our presidents and people like George H.W. Bush getting knighted by the Queen, kneeling to the Queen, and Alan Greenspan, kneeling and being knighted by the Queen. And you had to ask yourself, why would someone from a nation that claims to be independent and head of their banking and head of their political government supposedly be bowing to the Queen if America is what we are told is the sovereign? Sovereignty comes from the divine right of kings from the Vatican, and the meaning of sovereignty is greatly different than what we were told, but there are reasons why the U.S. president was bowing to the Queen. Because there is a hierarchy and a network and a governing structure that is not what we are told that it is. But we're told to ignore this stuff because it's just conspiracy theory. We're told this by organizations whose newscasters and whose preachers and so forth are members of groups like the Council on Foreign Relations. Like I think maybe Glenn Pace was, since I see pictures that say CFR with him in it. Then again, I mentioned that when I went and met with the head of the John Birch Society, who was a counselor in an LDS stake presidency, his name was E. Vance Smith. He told me smugly that there were members of general authorities in the LDS Church that were members of the Council on Foreign Relations, which of course is basically a treasonous organization, since it's designed to bring the United States into a subservient position inside of a world government. So here I wanted to just briefly show Council on Foreign Relations member Elder Brent Scowcroft. A little clip from a video I did, and the quality of the sound is a little bit messed up, but this is real short. He's going to be talking to a BYU graduating class here, and he's going to mention multiple times the creation of a new world order, of which he wants them to be contributing members. And Brent Scowcroft, as we can see in the ISGS webpage, is rated like number 10 in his number of connections with various, NGOs, non-government organizations. Number 1 is Henry Kissinger, his business partner at Kissinger Associates. Brent Scowcroft has got his own gig going and has been like a security advisor to 5 presidents, and is involved with these treasonous NGOs, Aspen Strategy Group, all these, just tons of them, and in formation of the NSA, which is such a criminal organization. It's incredible. If you haven't seen the film Enemy of the State, might find it interesting as well as entertaining, but there's a lot of actual truth that's revealed as far as the wickedness of these privately owned organizations like the NSA, FBI, and CIA. Not that all members and employees are privy to everything that's going on or are Satanists by any means. Many well-intentioned people may be in some of them, but their covert operations are despicable. Here's Ezra Taft Benson.
Is increasing its evil influence and control over America and the entire world.
And the rule of law. Skokov has been a key and trusted advisor for the last 5. And as National Security Advisor to President Bush, is a steady and vital associate in ongoing relationships between the White House and leaders of all other nations across the world. President Hinckley, President Lee, we have perhaps an unparalleled opportunity to help create a new world order, one more conducive to the values Americans have held dear. A new world order will appear. The issue is not whether there will be a new world order. I suggest what the new world order can and should.
So the position of all these secret societies and these NGOs and the relationship they have to Satanism and more secretive orders, whether it be Skull and Bones, where you have, 3 generations of Bushes involved with, from their Nazi banker Prescott Bush, daddy of HW, to HW, who was head of the CIA and President of the United States and head of the Council on Foreign Relations. And you ask yourself, how did they move from one of these things to the next? Just like, Arnold went from bodybuilding to into acting to governor of California. It's because of the secret society network, the occult that these people all belong to, and they go from positions of leadership in seemingly unrelated venues, whether it be from acting to law to politics. They move with ease because it's not always just what you know, it's also who you know, and it's the position that you hold within Freemasonry, within Skull and Bones, or other secretive orders, Knights Templar, Rosicrucianism, orders that we are told, such as the Illuminati and the Danites, that don't exist, but they do. And that is why we have things happening in a way that defies logic otherwise in the success of the cover-ups of these bastard priests, whether they be in the pedophilia priesthood of the Catholic, Mormon, or Jehovah's Witnesses or others, or Mormon offshoot groups like convicted child rapist Warren Jeffs, who wasn't really much different from Joseph Smith and his spiritual wife system, and Brigham Young and his brutality and reign of terror in the Mormon Reformation. I think I'm going to wind it up here and invite further investigation on your own and into, like I said, Clint Richardson's Corporation Nation video is a great place to research. And I have to say that I kind of like my Cult Mind Control and Secret Combinations pages, and then the one that we started with, which doesn't have a ton of information but has some good narrative, some good photos, and we'll have more and more videos interlocking and linking the Cult Mind Control aspect of this, which is something that begs the question, why do we have this mind control in the media and in the churches and through Freemasonry to change our view of the way the entire world functions. And it's because there are people that are in powerful positions, and they're all in the occult and using the rest of us for their own private purposes and to forward an agenda that doesn't have our best interests at heart. In the name of the Age of Reason, Dodger Game out. Have a great day.